You think I want your money, Miles? Baby, I was the money before you learned how to lace a tie. The words didn't echo. They dropped like a gavel, hard and final. The courtroom froze. Miles blinked, as if she'd spoken in another language. He turned to her, slowly. This was the woman he once called soft. The woman who kissed his shoulder after nights tangled in expensive linen. The woman he thought he controlled. Now she stood tall. No smile, no tears. Just truth, sharp and clean. Victoria Schaffer, seated in her designer heels and quiet judgment, clutched her pearls. Her face drained. Her legacy threatened. Even the court clerk lowered her pen. The judge adjusted his glasses. Chandra didn't shift. Her lawyer leaned back, confident. Miles's lawyer turned a shade paler. Everything that was about to happen, every number revealed, every secret unwrapped, would trace back to that sentence. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't needed to. Because Chandra Bordeaux had already won. Welcome back to Mr. Peterson Long Stories, where the story isn't just about pain, but power. What you're about to hear isn't fiction. It's what happens when a woman gives her heart to a man who thought she came with no value, and learns too late that she was the one holding the crown the entire time. This story isn't just about betrayal. It's about clarity. It's about standing in a courtroom, looking a man in the face, and making him wish he never underestimated you. You'll meet Chandra, a brilliant woman who gave a piece of herself to someone who only saw the surface. You'll watch Miles, her wealthy CEO husband, mock her at the divorce table. You'll sit in that courtroom as the numbers are read, and silence hits like thunder. And in the end, you'll understand something real. Some women never needed a seat at the table. They built the building. So grab your seat. Turn up your volume. Let this story remind you that love should never cost your dignity. Let me ask you something. Have you ever been underestimated by someone you loved? Not just ignored, but made to feel small? As if your worth depended on what they could give you? Have you ever been talked down to by the same person who once swore they'd protect you? If that's ever been you, this story is yours. Before we go deeper, I want you to do one thing for yourself and for someone else who needs to hear this. Tap the like button. Share this story with someone strong. And most of all, drop A in the comments if you've ever had to walk away from someone who thought you needed them to breathe. Let's light up this comment section with truth, because there's power in telling your story, and there's healing in hearing one that feels a little too close. This isn't just entertainment. This is fuel for anyone who's been silenced, belittled, cheated, or doubted. Now let's get to it. This story begins in Chicago, but it could belong anywhere. It's about a woman named Chandra, who walked into love carrying more power than she revealed. She wanted something real, not a man chasing her balance sheet. So she hid her empire and gave Miles a chance. At first he seemed different, charming, attentive, even gentle. But love wrapped in lies doesn't stay sweet for long. The man who kissed her shoulder at night became the man who mocked her in public. The man who once promised to protect her became the man who betrayed her. Their marriage collapsed under the weight of arrogance and cheating. And when the time came to end it all, Miles believed he held every card. He laughed through the divorce proceedings, confident she would crawl away with scraps. But Chandra wasn't built to crawl. When the judge read her worth out loud, the room changed. His smirk fell. His mother's pride shattered. And the world finally saw who she had always been. This is not only about a broken marriage. It's about a woman who refused to be broken with it. So when Chandra stood in that courtroom, calm, collected, unshaken, she wasn't looking for pity. She came for peace. Not revenge. Not applause. Just truth. She had spent years loving a man who thought her silence meant weakness. A man who confused patience with dependence. But as you'll soon see, Chandra was never the one begging for validation. She walked away from everything that disrespected her. Not because she had to, but because she could. What comes next is raw, intimate, real. There are no second chances, no dramatic reunions. This is a story about what happens when a woman takes her power back, quietly, completely, and without asking for permission. She didn't burn his world down. She bought it. And when it was all said and done, she left him with nothing but memories, and a front row seat to the empire she never needed him to build. Now, let's go back to the beginning, to the night they met, the lie that tasted like love, and the man who never saw her coming. By the time Chandra turned 30, she had already moved the financial world in ways the press hadn't yet figured out. Her name wasn't on the headlines. It wasn't meant to be. Her power didn't sit in glass towers or boardrooms full of cameras. It lived in controlling interest, silent acquisitions, and strategic exits that left tech founders wondering where their company had gone. Chandra Bordeaux was a financial phantom, known only in circles where silence was currency and discretion was a shield. She built Bordeaux equity from the shadows, flipping 3 dying fintech companies into gold. Each deal had one thing in common: no one ever knew she was the one behind it. She didn't need praise, she needed leverage. But her personal life didn't mirror that control. Behind her power, Chandra craved something money couldn't manufacture: connection. After her father died, her world narrowed. Her mother lived in D.C., focused on charity galas and legacy projects. Friends treated her like an investment. Her last relationship ended with the man asking if she could fund his startup. She was tired of being seen as a ladder, so she started hiding. To the public, she was Chandra Ellison, a polished but modest marketing assistant at a mid-level agency in downtown Chicago. She paid her own rent on a 2-bedroom condo she already owned. She took the train. She carried a vintage handbag on purpose. The illusion gave her something rare: normalcy. For once, she could walk into a room and not be measured by zeros on a balance sheet. Still, she moved smart. Her staff at Bordeaux Equity only interacted with her through her senior partner. No photos, no mentions, just wire instructions and closed-door decisions. She built a life with 2 layers, one public, one untouchable. And it worked, for a while. But loneliness creeps in quietly, even for women who command empires. She wanted warmth, intimacy, not another man chasing her for access. She wanted to hear "I love you" without wondering if he meant "I love what you own." So when she RSVP'd to an exclusive charity gala at the Field Museum, a place she quietly donated to under a foundation's name, she decided to go alone. As Chandra Ellison, no last names, no silent handlers, no whispers of wealth. Just a woman in a dress she tailored herself. A woman trying, one more time, to find something real. She didn't know her next decision would change the direction of her life, and that the man she'd meet that night would be the first to touch her heart and the last to ever hold her trust. The Field Museum at night held a different kind of magic. Its white columns stood sharp against the inky sky, and the steps glowed under amber uplighting. Inside, soft jazz flowed through the vaulted ceilings, and the giant T-Rex skeleton stood. Watch as tuxedos and evening gowns moved like a slow tide through the marble halls. Chandra arrived alone. She stepped from the black car, booked under her assistant's name, with no entourage, no red carpet energy, just confidence. Her heels clicked softly across the stone floor as she made her way past familiar faces. None of them recognized her, of course. Not in this role. Tonight, she wasn't a force. She wasn't a board member. She was background, exactly how she wanted it. The gala supported youth tech education, something she had funded through 2 non-profit arms she never attached her name to. A ribbon on the donor wall bore the words in memory of Clarence B., her father. Few people ever asked who Clarence B. was. Fewer still made the connection. She slipped into the space between silent and visible, a borrowed place where she could breathe. The crowd was high-level, tech founders, hedge fund heads, a few celebrities trying to stay relevant. Waiters moved between conversations with silver trays and practiced smiles. The champagne was crisp. The food was forgettable. Chandra found a quiet spot near the open bar. She adjusted the strap of her dark blue gown, a floor-length number she'd taken in at the waist the night before. It cost $39 at a boutique in Hyde Park. No one here would guess that. The fabric hugged her figure in the way luxury brands often failed to do. She didn't need labels to make an entrance. A few men glanced her way, some women too. She ignored them all. She wasn't here for attention. The bartender approached. "Sparkling water. Lime," she said. As he turned, another voice joined. "Whiskey neat," the man said. "Make it 2. Chandra didn't look over right away. She let him stand there. Let him wonder. The bartender placed both drinks down. She reached for her glass. The man beat her to it. "That one's mine," she said, finally turning to face him. He smiled. "I figured. But if you'd rather trade, I wouldn't." He laughed. The sound was low, confident. Now she looked tall, athletic frame under a tailored black suit, not a rented one. The watch on his wrist was understated, but real. Clean-shaven, green eyes that studied, not scanned. Miles Schaefer. She'd heard the name, but never connected it to the face. Tonight, he was just a stranger at the bar, one who didn't know who he was talking to, and one who, in a few minutes, would begin thinking he'd found someone lucky to meet him, when in truth, he was standing next to the woman who'd one day own more than his company. She'd own the final word. Chandra had mastered the performance. By day, she walked into a modest downtown office with second-hand furniture and a chipped glass door labeled Ellison Creative, LLC. To her neighbors in the building, she was a mid-level marketing consultant, hard-working, punctual, polite. They saw her carry a paper coffee cup and eat lunch from the cafe downstairs. Her wardrobe was practical, her hair always neat, and her makeup minimal. What they didn't see was the encrypted laptop that linked to private financial dashboards. They didn't know the Wi-Fi name ECLLC.secure routed through 3 firewalls and 2 hidden networks. They didn't know that every day by noon, she approved or rejected funding proposals that could shift stock markets. They didn't know Bordeaux Equity ran quietly from a virtual network of proxies, and senior analysts who followed orders only passed through her private signal. She moved between 2 worlds and never let them touch. In public, she earned $98,000 on paper. She drove a used Audi with tinted windows. She filed basic taxes. Her name showed up on no high society list. No press ever caught her face. No financial blog ever tracked her name to any asset. But in private, she held controlling shares in 3 companies that had IPO'd in the last 5 years. She had voting rights over a board that once tried to push her out until they realized she was the owner, not the employee. Her estate included commercial properties in Atlanta, D.C., and Houston, all under shell corporations. She didn't flaunt. She owned. She didn't post about wealth. She used it to erase anyone who disrespected her. But with all that power came a loneliness money couldn't fix. She had kept herself so hidden, so guarded, that intimacy felt like a foreign language. And yet, there was peace in her routine. She woke early. She meditated. She ran 5 miles before the city stirred. She read the Financial Times while eating grapefruit and almond butter toast. She responded to emails with precision. She corrected contracts with red-line detail. She met with a therapist once a month, because even women who win need someone to talk to. But she missed something. She missed laughing over nothing, being seen without layers, hearing her name spoken without expectation. Love wasn't off the table. It was just off the radar. Every time someone got close, they either wanted a piece of her or feared they had nothing to offer her. She was tired of being treated like a prize or a threat. That's why the gala mattered. As Chandra Ellison, she could be both invisible and present. She could watch a man approach her without calculating his motives. She could say no without hurting anyone's future. But as fate would have it, the man who stepped beside her at that bar wouldn't just ask for her name. He'd ask for her heart, and she would let him believe, for a while, that she had nothing to lose. "What's your poison?" he asked, swirling the amber in his glass. Chandra glanced sideways, unimpressed. "Sparkling water. No poison tonight." Miles smirked. "Health nut or cautious?" "Careful," she replied. "There's a difference." He nodded like he respected that. Miles. She didn't give her name. Not yet. He leaned against the bar, watching her with ease. Not the way men scan women like they're weighing options, but with curiosity. It made her pause. "Is this your opening line with everyone tonight?" she asked. "Only the woman who hasn't laughed once since I got here," he said. She raised a brow. "Maybe you're not that funny." He laughed, and it wasn't forced. "Fair. But I still think you're not enjoying yourself." She sipped her water. Enjoyment is expensive in rooms like this. That caught him off guard. His expression shifted for a second, less polished, more present. "That's the realest thing I've heard tonight." For a brief moment, Chandra saw the difference. Miles Schaefer, the man, wasn't the same as the name attached to downtown skyscrapers. She had expected arrogance, but what she got was grounded. He didn't brag. He didn't name drop. He didn't lean too close. Instead, he asked where she worked. She told him a small marketing agency. He didn't press. He shared that he ran a firm in logistics and transport. She pretended not to know the company's size. He liked that. They didn't talk numbers. They talked music. He loved old jazz. She preferred Motown. He shared a story about getting lost in Morocco. She countered with one about a near arrest in Italy, both of which were true. The conversation didn't feel rehearsed. It flowed like water in a stream she didn't know she missed. She noticed his laugh lines, the slight calluses on his fingers, the way he looked her in the eye when he spoke. He noticed the way she paused before answering anything personal, how she scanned the room when she thought he wasn't watching, the way she didn't flinch when men nearby raised their voices. "I don't think you like people," he said, grinning. "I like truth," she answered. He raised his glass. "To the rare ones, then." They clinked drinks. And Chandra did something she hadn't done in over a year. She smiled, without planning it. He didn't touch her. He didn't ask for her number right away. He simply asked if she'd be at the next event. "I might," she said. "I hope so." Then he walked away, just enough mystery left behind to keep her curious. She watched him disappear into the crowd, still holding her drink. She had met many men before, but Miles Schaefer didn't try to impress her. He talked like someone who thought she was already impressive, and that, more than wealth, more than looks, was why she remembered him. 2 weeks passed before they met again. Same city, different room. This time it was a private networking event at the Chicago Athletic Association. Invite only, no press, and no plus ones. Chandra received an email with no sender listed. Only the words, "You were hard to forget." Friday, 8 p.m., top floor. She almost didn't go, but she did, and when she walked in, Miles was already there. He wore a gray suit this time, no tie, 2 buttons undone. He didn't rush toward her. He let her come to him, as if he already knew she would. "I knew you'd come," he said. "I almost didn't." That would have been a tragedy. Would it? She challenged. "Absolutely," he answered, without a pause. Their words danced. Teasing, but sharp. She pushed. He kept pace. His charm wasn't sugary, it had weight. Confidence without needing to dominate. That was rare. They sat by the window overlooking Millennium Park, drinks in hand. She asked, "So how many women have you pulled the mystery email trick on?" He held up 3 fingers, then tucked 2 away. She laughed, against her better judgment. He noticed. "You don't laugh easily," he said. "I don't fake reactions." "Good," he said. "I hate performances." Chandra sipped her drink, watching him over the rim. Says the man who walks into a room like he owns it. He leaned in slightly. "I do own it. I just don't need everyone to know that." She smiled. "We might have that in common." Their energy buzzed, unspoken, charged. Every sentence flirted with meaning. Every pause was deliberate. But neither of them gave everything away. He didn't ask where she lived. She didn't ask about his past. They talked about books, old movies, the best fried chicken spots in Bronzeville. He surprised her when he said he grew up on the South Side before boarding school took him away. "People assume I was born with a silver spoon," he said. "Were you?" "I stole mine," he smirked. "Polished it myself." She nodded. "Respect." He turned serious for a moment. "You remind me of someone I should have met 10 years ago." She held his gaze. "That would have been a problem. I would have ruined you." Miles grinned. "Or I would have spent 10 years trying to catch up." Silence stretched, but it wasn't awkward. It was full. They talked for hours, letting the night peel away everything shallow. And when he finally asked for her number, she gave it. Not her assistant's, not a backup line, her real one. Later, when she left, he didn't follow. He stood at the glass, watching her walk down the long hallway. Not chasing her, but clearly watching every step. And as her driver pulled away, Chandra checked her phone. A new message. "I want to see you again. Not for show. For you." She didn't reply right away. She didn't need to. The magnet between them had already done its work. Chandra didn't fall into things. She chose. And after that second night with Miles, after the guarded smiles, the subtle heat, and the way he hadn't asked once what she did for a living, she made a decision. He was worth exploring. But only under rules she controlled. Her past had taught her that giving someone full access too early only led to control, then disappointment. She had no interest in being someone's trophy. She didn't want to be adored for appearances, or used as a status boost at some future corporate dinner. So she set her boundaries early. The first date, she picked the restaurant, Virtue, in Hyde Park, a place that meant something to her. Soul food, black-owned, deeply rooted. No wine pairings, no 7-course fluff. Just cornbread, fried green tomatoes, and conversation that didn't come with pretense. Miles showed up 10 minutes early. He waited outside, even though the host offered him a table. He didn't text, didn't ask where she was. He simply stood by the entrance, hands in pockets, like someone who understood timing was part of respect. She liked that. Over dinner, she gave him pieces, but not the whole picture. She told him she worked in creative strategy, that she enjoyed independence, that she wasn't into loud scenes or social media clout. He nodded, taking it in without trying to pin her down. He didn't flinch when she said she grew up in DC public schools before earning her way into Yale. He didn't look surprised when she said her parents divorced early and she'd learned how to walk alone. "What about you?" she asked. "My dad left before I could spell his name," he said simply. "Mom raised me until she remarried. Boarding school kept me out of trouble." She nodded. "You turned out well-fed." He smirked. "Better than I should have." They didn't kiss that night, not even a hug. He walked her to her car, waited until she was inside, and said, "I'll call tomorrow." He did. For 2 months, he remained consistent. Not clingy, not absent. Present. Dates in quiet places. Walks near Navy Pier. Nights listening to old vinyl records and debating which jazz pianist had the better left hand. She noticed the little things. He didn't flash his wallet. He opened doors. He remembered what she ordered, and once mailed her a signed first edition of a novel she mentioned in passing. But most importantly, he never asked her for more than she was ready to give. He never asked to come to her apartment. He didn't press when she declined a weekend getaway. He was patient, or maybe just unsure how much she was holding back. That's how she liked it. Because Chandra had made one quiet vow. If this man wanted her, he'd have to fall for the version that didn't own anything. The version who walked into the world as if she had nothing but a name and a good dress. And if he stayed, then maybe, just maybe, he'd get to meet the rest. The Pendry Hotel sat tall over Michigan Avenue, wrapped in gold-lit windows and black stone, with a quiet kind of luxury that didn't need to speak for itself. Miles reserved the suite under his assistant's name. He told Chandra to come up when you're ready. Not pushy, not performative, just a text with a room number. She stared at the message longer than she expected to. This wasn't about romance, not tonight. She was in the mood to forget herself. And something about Miles, the way he watched her, the way he didn't crowd her, made her curious enough to say yes. When she stepped into the elevator, she didn't feel nervous. She felt ready. The suite door opened before she could knock twice. He was barefoot, shirt untucked, sleeves rolled to his elbows. "You came," he said. She walked past him without answering, letting her clutch fall on the marble counter. "You always leave the door unlocked?" "Only when I want someone to walk in." Chandra turned to face him. "You sure you're ready for that kind of night?" He didn't answer. He reached behind her and shut the door, and in that quiet space between them, the tension snapped. His hand went to her waist. Her lips found his neck. They didn't make small talk. They didn't ask questions. It was mouths, fingers, heat, movement. Clothes slipped off in uneven stages, her heels first, then his shirt. Then her dress unzipped halfway as they backed toward the bed. She pushed him down onto it. He let her. The city lights spilled through the window, painting shadows over their skin. He leaned back on his elbows, watching her pull off the last piece. Of fabric with the kind of control that didn't ask for permission. "You look like trouble," he said, breathless. Chandra moved to straddle him. "I am." His hands gripped her thighs, firm but respectful. She kissed him first, hard, deliberate. He pulled her closer like he'd wanted this longer than he'd admitted. She tasted the whiskey on his breath. He tasted the restraint she'd held for weeks. They moved like people trying to outlast a storm. No tenderness, just pace and pull. Sweat, teeth, bare skin against cool sheets. Her hands pressed flat against his chest. His fingers tangled in her hair. There was no music, no talking, just breathing. Heavy, hungry breathing. And when it ended, neither of them said a word for a full minute. Their chests rose and fell together, her head on his shoulder, his arm over her back. Silence, but the kind that came after something true, not something reckless. In the darkness, he whispered, "I didn't expect that." She smiled against his skin. "Neither did I. But the truth? She did." She'd planned every move in that room the moment she walked through the door. She just hadn't expected him to match her energy. The second round didn't wait for logic. His lips found her collarbone before she could slip out of bed. She let out a low breath, half warning, half welcome. His fingers skimmed her waist. She rolled on top of him, her thigh sliding across his lap like they'd done this 100 times before. But this wasn't routine. It was fire, fast, bright, and burning through what little hesitation they had left. He gripped her hips with purpose, not aggression. Chandra pressed into him with control. They moved with the kind of urgency that only exists between two people, afraid the moment might end too soon. This time there was noise. Her moans weren't quiet. His voice cracked when she pulled his bottom lip between her teeth. No shame, no pretending. When she dragged her nails down his back, he hissed. "You good?" she asked, breath shallow. "I haven't felt this alive in a long time," he muttered. She didn't smile. She rocked against him harder. The rhythm between them was messy but real, the kind that wasn't polished for anyone else's eyes. It wasn't about lighting or angles or what it looked like. It was about what it pulled out of them. He gripped the headboard. She gripped his wrist. His head fell back. She leaned forward and whispered, "Keep up." He did. Their bodies collided again and again, moving with a reckless grace. His hands roamed her back, memorizing every curve. Her mouth met his with hunger. Nothing soft, nothing slow. Everything in her demanded release. Everything in him tried to hold on. When it finally ended, she collapsed onto the bed beside him, her chest heaving. Her thigh draped over his leg. His hand found hers and squeezed, not because he meant to, just because his body needed contact. They laid there in a haze of heat, breath, and sweat-slick skin. "I thought you were quiet," he said, voice hoarse. She didn't open her eyes. "You thought wrong." He chuckled. "You're full of surprises. You've only seen a few." He turned on his side to face her. "Are you always this intense?" She met his gaze. "Only when I don't want to be forgotten." His eyes softened. "I won't forget you," he said. She didn't respond, because she didn't need him to remember her body. She needed to know if he'd remember her silence, her control, the way she led without asking for permission. That night wasn't about love, not for her. It was about power, hers, and for once, she let someone close enough to feel it. He didn't dominate. He didn't beg. He kept pace. And that made her want to see what else he could handle. The sheets had cooled. Their breathing slowed, but the tension hadn't left. Chandra sat up, the blanket pooling around her waist, her back exposed to the city skyline. The window stretched across the suite, showing a glittering view of downtown, but he wasn't looking at the view. He was watching her. "You don't sleep much, do you?" he asked. She reached for the glass of water on the nightstand. "Sleep is expensive when you're building." "Building what?" She didn't answer. Instead, she took a slow sip and set the glass down, then turned. "You always ask questions after sex?" she said. "Only when it matters," Miles replied, sitting up beside her. He looked different now, less polished, more real. "Tell me something true," she said. "Like what?" "Something no one knows about you." Miles leaned his head back against the wall. "I've been in rooms full of people and still felt invisible." She studied him. "That's not surprising." "Why?" "Because you walk like someone who's still trying to prove he belongs." He chuckled, but it lacked humor. "Maybe I am." Chandra tilted her head. "So all this?" She gestured to the suite, the view, the high thread count bedding. "What is it? A trophy or a hiding place?" He answered without pause. "Both." She nodded, respecting the honesty. "Your turn," he said. She leaned back on her palms. "What do you want to know? What you're running from?" The air shifted. She didn't flinch, but something behind her eyes went still. "I'm not running," she said. "Then why do you look like you're waiting to disappear?" The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was sharp. Then she smiled, slow and deliberate. "Are you always this nosy?" "Only when I care." She laughed lightly, but it didn't mask the way her jaw tightened. Miles shifted closer, the sheet still draped over his waist. He reached for her face, just one finger, tracing the line of her cheekbone. "You don't have to be steel with me," he whispered. She met his gaze. "That's the only way I know how to survive." "Try softer," he said. She kissed him instead. This time, it wasn't rushed. It wasn't a battle. It was quiet, slow, exploratory. Their lips moved like a conversation they weren't ready to have with words. His hand slipped into her hair. Her fingers rested on his ribs, not pulling, just being. They lay back again, tangled but calm. "Do you regret coming here tonight?" he asked. She brushed her thumb across his chest. "Not yet." He grinned. "I'll take that." She didn't say anything more, not because she didn't feel something, but because she felt too much. And right now, she wasn't ready to be vulnerable. She could give him her body, but her truth? That would take more than sweat and a shared bed. By the time dawn crept over the skyline, both of them were still wide awake. Chandra lay on her side, one leg hooked over the blanket, watching the city from the corner of her eye. She didn't need to look at Miles to know he was doing the same, pretending to rest, but thinking 2 moves ahead. She was used to that. This was how powerful people loved, like a negotiation with touch instead of terms. Miles sat up, planting his feet on the floor. He stretched, glanced over his shoulder, and smirked. "You watching me?" he asked, only to see what kind of man needs a full suite for one night. He stood, walked to the small bar, poured himself a splash of cold water. "One who enjoys options, or one who likes to be the one choosing," she replied. He handed her the glass. "You saying you don't?" Chandra took it without breaking eye contact. "I'm saying I know when I'm being managed." That made him pause. Just for a second, she kept speaking. "You don't flirt like a man who's unsure. You move like someone who calculates everything. And yet," he said, returning to the bed, "you still came up." "I did," she said, "on my own terms." He climbed back in beside her, leaning on one elbow. "Tell me what you think my terms were." She traced a line across his chest with her finger. "You wanted control. You wanted to be the one who made me forget my name." "Did I?" "Almost." He grinned. "Almost is a challenge." "No," she said, moving closer, lips near his ear. "Almost is a reminder." He blinked. "Of what?" "That I let you think you had me." The smile faded from his lips, just for a moment. And then he laughed. A low, genuine laugh. "That's cold," he said. "No," she said. "That's balance." Miles rolled over onto his back, arms folded behind his head. "You know, for someone who claims not to care about power plays, you're pretty damn good at them." "I never said I didn't care," she replied. "I said I didn't lose." The line sat between them like truth laid bare. They were both strong, both hungry, both used to being the one with the final say. But tonight had taught them something unexpected. Control wasn't always about dominance. It was about mutual recognition. He didn't beg. She didn't yield. Neither of them fumbled or backed down. They circled. They tested. They touched in ways that said, "I see you, but I won't be swallowed." And it worked, for now. He thought he'd met a woman worth chasing. She knew she'd met a man worth testing. But both believed they held the upper hand. That's the thing about 2 alphas in the same room. There's no submission, just strategy. And in that bed at the Pendry, neither was ready to admit who was actually leading. The suite was quiet again, the hum of early morning traffic floating in from the street below. Chandra sat cross-legged on the bed, wrapped in one of the hotel's thick white robes, her hair slightly damp from a shower. She looked relaxed, but her mind was ticking. Miles, on the other hand, leaned against the headboard shirtless, scrolling through his phone until he caught her watching. "You always look that serious when the sun comes up?" he asked. She smirked. "I think better when I'm clean." He laughed softly. "Well, I'm not thinking at all right now. That's because your brain's still in your hands." He tossed a pillow at her. She caught it without flinching. Then his expression shifted, something more open. "I like this," he said. "What?" "This. You. No filters, no stage." She raised an eyebrow. "You think this is all of me?" "Feels like it." She tilted her head. "You ever ask yourself why you like women who seem like work?" He smiled. "Because I'm tired of chasing easy. I've done enough of that." His voice dropped. "Look," he continued, "I know what I look like, rich, sharp, like I've got answers. But truth is, I've spent years building things that never felt like home." Chandra's expression softened, just slightly. "I've built companies, scaled teams, landed big clients, but half the time I walk into my house and it still feels temporary. My fridge has champagne and eggs, that's it. She blinked. Champagne and eggs? Because I'm always celebrating or escaping. Nothing in between. That honesty caught her off guard. Most men in his position only led with wins. But Miles offered up the cracks too. You want a house to feel like home? She asked. He shrugged. I want something that doesn't ask me to perform. Someone who doesn't need me to impress them to feel seen. She looked down at her lap, picking at a loose thread on the robe. Well, she said after a pause, then you're either in the wrong city or the wrong circles. He nodded. Probably both. He turned to her again. What about you? What's your dream? She didn't blink. I want to start something of my own, she said smoothly. Maybe a creative agency. I've got ideas, but no resources yet. A lie. And a well-rehearsed one. He looked at her like he believed every word. I can help, he said without hesitation. Chandra smiled. Don't offer that. I don't do charity. It's not charity, it's belief. She leaned in, placed a soft kiss at the corner of his mouth. Then believe I'm fine. He nodded again, letting it drop. And just like that, she pulled the curtain closed. Again. She had given him her body, her laugh, even a bit of tenderness. But her empire? That stayed hidden. Because if he wanted to love her, she needed to know if he could love her when she looked like a woman still figuring it out. Miles had fallen asleep first. His breathing deepened, lips parted slightly, one arm flung across the pillow she had just vacated. He looked younger like that. Less CEO, more boy who once carried too much weight too early. Chandra stood at the window in silence, robe tied loose around her waist, a glass of water in her hand. The city buzzed far below her, headlights gliding like stars on pavement. She exhaled slowly, her heart quieter than it had been in weeks. Everything about tonight had touched something in her, not just the way he moved, not just the intimacy. It was his honesty, his need to be seen. That was the part she hadn't expected. Most men she met had a script. They performed, talked about profits, condos, jets, expectations. Miles had done some of that in the beginning, but not here, not after they touched. He'd stripped that part away too, and it made her feel seen. For a moment, she let that comfort in, let it sit with her like warm sunlight sneaking into a cold room. But only for a moment, because Chandra knew how men changed when they found out the truth. They always said they wanted a woman who had her own, who didn't need them. But the moment she had more than them, the moment she made them feel replaceable, everything shifted. She had lived through that lesson. She didn't need to repeat it. She turned back to the bed. Miles shifted slightly, reaching for her in his sleep, not opening his eyes, just searching. Her chest ached. She placed the glass on the counter and walked quietly to her bag, slid her phone from the inside pocket, checked her notifications, cleared a few texts from her COO, scanned market reports, everything running smoothly. No fires, just the life she'd built, moving quietly without her needing to push. She was never out of control, not really. But tonight had brought her close. She glanced at Miles again. He was kind, maybe even good. But kindness didn't mean safety. It didn't mean permanence. And she wasn't ready to let her guard down for a man who didn't even know who he'd just shared a bed with. She returned to the window. The robe slipped slightly off one shoulder. She could still feel the heat of his hands on her skin, could still hear his words. I want something that doesn't ask me to perform, and she believed him. That scared her more than anything, because she wanted to perform too, not for approval, but for control. She wanted to be touched and still hold the upper hand, wanted to feel wanted, but never exposed. Tonight had cracked the door, but before Miles could walk through it, she needed to know. Would he still want her when he realized she didn't need him? Or would he walk like all the others who mistook independence for indifference? She watched him sleep and made her quiet promise. You can stay, but only if you don't flinch when I show you everything. The reservation was for 6:30 p.m. at Gibson's Italia, a place where Power dressed up in linen shirts and expensive perfume. Miles had insisted. It's just dinner, he said, brushing her knee in the car. She's not that bad. Chandra wasn't nervous. She didn't do nerves, but she understood strategy, and meeting the mother of a man like Miles, that wasn't dinner. That was a first round of negotiations, with a woman who likely read lives like financial statements. When they walked in, the hostess smiled without warmth. Mr. Schaefer, your table is ready. Eyes flicked to Chandra, then quickly away. They were seated by the window, skyline shimmering just across the river. Victoria Schaefer was already there, sipping something clear and sharp, her posture perfect. She stood when they approached, just long enough to perform manners. "Miles," she said, kissing his cheek. "You're late." He grinned. "You're early." Victoria's gaze moved to Chandra. Her smile was there, but didn't reach her eyes. "And you must be the one who's been keeping my son off the radar." Chandra extended her hand. "Chandra Ellison. Nice to meet you." Victoria took it. Very firm grip. "So I've been told." Miles chuckled. "Mom, don't start." They sat. Menus opened. Polite chatter floated between them. Victoria asked where Chandra worked. "A small creative firm near the Loop," Chandra replied smoothly. "Ah," Victoria said. "One of those newer boutique setups. I admire the effort people put into those." Chandra nodded. "We do all right." Victoria smiled. "Tight. That's good." Miles always said he preferred women with ambition. Miles looked between them, oblivious. "She's got that, trust me." Victoria's glass hovered midair. "I'm sure." The waiter arrived, saving them for a moment. Orders placed. Wine offered, declined by Chandra. "Not drinking tonight?" Victoria asked. "Not tonight," Chandra said. "I like to stay sharp when I meet people who matter." It was said kindly, but Victoria's eyes flickered. Game on, and Chandra knew exactly how to play it. The conversation turned light again, at least on the surface. Victoria asked about Chandra's upbringing. Not out of interest, out of habit. She probed for pedigree the way some scan a resume. "So, where did you grow up?" she asked, delicately slicing her steak. "Washington, D.C., Chandra replied. "Ward 7. Victoria blinked, smiled thinly. "That's east of the river, yes?" Chandra sipped her water. "Yes. My mother still lives there. It's home." Victoria nodded. "It must have been character building." Chandra tilted her head. "It built something." Miles, chewing, missed the exchange entirely. Victoria pressed on. "And your family, what do they do?" "My mother works in education policy. My father passed. He was an army officer." Victoria's eyebrows lifted for just a second. "Impressive. Self-made then?" "I had help. From my father's discipline, from my mother's expectations, and from never being allowed to fail. Still," Victoria said, tone even, "it's good to see someone rise above circumstance." Chandra held her gaze. "Circumstance is often misunderstood." "How so?" "Some people think zip codes define people." "I don't." Victoria placed her knife down. "Of course, I didn't mean." Chandra smiled. "But you did." A pause. Then Victoria leaned back, fingers laced on the tablecloth. "You're direct. I prefer honest." Victoria's voice softened. "You're certainly not what I pictured. I've heard that before." There was nothing loud, nothing overt, no slurs, no shouting, just the quiet offense of being underestimated, of being praised for surviving a life the other woman would never understand, let alone respect. Victoria spoke in compliments, but her eyes searched for flaws. She complimented Chandra's earrings, then asked if they were vintage, code for second-hand. She mentioned Chandra's dress was refreshingly simple. She asked if Chandra had traveled much for work, a light probe into whether she'd seen more than one coast. Each question had a weight behind it, and Chandra heard it all. Miles remained cheerful, retelling a story about a college prank. Victoria laughed. Chandra listened, composed. She didn't need to win the table. She just needed to be unshaken, and that alone made her dangerous in Victoria's eyes. Chandra didn't flinch, didn't fumble, and didn't fire back, because she didn't need to. She'd sat across tables like this before. She knew the script. Smile, nod, subtle cut, passive dig. It wasn't new. What Victoria underestimated was how practiced Chandra was at staying composed while dismantling someone with elegance. When the waiter returned to clear their appetizer plates, Chandra leaned back, folded her napkin, and gently placed it on her lap again. Victoria asked, "What drew you to marketing?" Chandra took her time. The challenge. Getting people to believe in things they can't see yet. Victoria smiled like a cat. How poetic. But don't you ever wish for something more stable? Something with structure? Structure is only as stable as the person building it, Chandra said. Miles, half listening, chimed in. She's being modest. Chandra's probably the most strategic person I know. Strategy is good, Victoria said. If used correctly. Chandra's smile didn't move. It usually is. Victoria lifted her wine glass. I've just always believed in surrounding Miles with women who sharpen him, ones who challenge him to grow. I'd agree with that, Chandra replied. But challenge doesn't always come from status or wealth. Sometimes it's just a matter of depth. Depth? Yes. You know, grit. Adaptability. The kind of woman who knows how to walk into a room like this and see everything for what it really is. Victoria paused mid-sip. Her eyes met Chandra's. Miles laughed, breaking the moment. God, I love this. Mom, she's sharper than most of my board. Chandra kept her expression calm, but her posture said everything. She didn't lean in. She didn't shrink. She held her ground with stillness. That was her power, never raising her voice, never making a scene, but forcing people to reckon with her presence. Victoria tried one more time. Well, I suppose Miles will learn what works for him. He already has, Chandra said. He just may not realize what it costs to stand across from it. Victoria blinked. Another clean hit, delivered without raising a brow. Miles talked through most of the dinner, completely unaware of the silent war unfolding between the two women beside him. He shared a memory from boarding school, joked about a failed investment, pitch in Silicon Valley, and laughed loudest at his own punchlines. He reached for Chandra's hand twice, giving it gentle squeezes like some kind of reassurance, but never. Once did he seem to notice the sharp undercurrent threading between every word his mother spoke. To him, it was just a pleasant meal. To Chandra, it was a test she didn't ask to take. Mom used to bring me here for my birthday, Miles said, dabbing his mouth. I was 12 the first time, couldn't pronounce anything on the menu, but I acted like I could. Victoria smiled warmly at him. And now, you own part of the building across the street. That's what happens when you raise a Schaefer, he joked. Chandra tilted her glass thoughtfully. Miles looked over. You okay? Fine, she said. You're quiet. She smiled gently. Just learning. He kissed her knuckles, oblivious to the way Victoria's mouth tightened at the gesture. The man was sharp in meetings, cutthroat in business, but somehow blind at his own dinner table. Or maybe he chose not to see it. Maybe he thought he was protecting both of them by pretending nothing was wrong. When Victoria leaned in later and said, "Don't let my questions intimidate you," Miles chuckled, not realizing the insult buried in the tone. She doesn't intimidate easily, he said. She's got this armor thing going on. I love that. Armor. He thought he was complimenting her, but it reminded Chandra of exactly how unseen she still was. He didn't realize she wasn't wearing armor. She was the weapon. Still, she let it pass. Not because she didn't want to correct him, but because she was starting to understand the man beside her more clearly. Miles wasn't clueless. He was comfortable. And sometimes, comfort was more dangerous than hostility. It let ignorance wear a smile, and it let men love women like her, while pretending the world treated them all the same. Dessert came and went without much conversation. A slice of tiramisu, a spoonful of sorbet. Chandra barely touched hers. Victoria picked at hers like a task. Miles leaned back, full and relaxed, talking about a new contract he'd landed that week. But Victoria was barely listening. Her eyes stayed on Chandra, studying her, not with interest, but calculation. There was something unsettled in her now. It wasn't about the dress. It wasn't about Chandra's career, her background, or even her responses. It was the control. Victoria was used to sculpting her son's world, managing his image, introducing him to acceptable women, wealthy, predictable, polished by prep schools and old money. But this woman? This woman wasn't molded by their world. She wasn't seeking entry into it either. Chandra didn't lean into Miles when he spoke. She didn't seek approval. She wasn't grateful to be at the table. She was steady, and that, more than anything, disturbed Victoria, because deep down, she knew the truth. Miles respected strength. He was drawn to women who didn't orbit around him. That's what had always scared her, that one day he'd fall for someone who didn't need him, and who wouldn't, had been to fit into the life Victoria had designed for her son, someone who could make him choose between comfort and authenticity, and Chandra was that woman. Polite, educated, beautiful, but still wrong, not because of her tone or her job, but because she wasn't like them. She didn't belong to the circles Victoria moved in. She didn't have the right lineage or the whispered legacy behind her name. And worst of all, she didn't care. That quiet indifference to approval, that was the threat. Miles reached for his card to pay. Victoria didn't stop him, though she usually insisted. Chandra watched her closely. For a second, Victoria's facade slipped. There, in her eyes, was the real concern. My son is slipping from my grip, and he's doing it willingly, for a woman I can't control. She rose from the table, smiling. It was lovely meeting you, Chandra. Chandra stood too. Likewise. They shook hands again, formally. This time, Victoria's grip was tighter, but Chandra's was stronger, and neither of them said what they were both thinking. This isn't over. Chandra never wanted a grand wedding. The idea of a ballroom full of strangers, hollowed toasts, or centerpieces, designed to impress people she didn't respect, it all felt unnecessary. She had walked away from Flash a long time ago. Love, if it was real, didn't need an audience. So when Miles proposed over dinner one quiet Friday night with no photographer, hiding in the corner and no showy theatrics, she said yes. Not because she was swept away, but because it felt simple, safe. I don't want the circus, she told him. You won't get one, he said. He didn't even ask why. They married 3 weeks later on a Thursday, a civil ceremony at the courthouse downtown. No bridesmaids, no family, just a judge, 2 signatures, and the low hum of a nearby elevator. Chandra wore a white pantsuit, sharp lines, clean fit. Miles wore a navy suit and loafers with no socks. He made jokes during the vows. She smiled through them. He kissed her forehead when it was over. It was easy. Too easy. Afterward, they walked out onto the plaza, the wind picking up off the lake. Miles looked at her, squinting from the sun. Well, he said, we did it. She nodded. We did. They went to lunch at a quiet Italian restaurant in Lincoln Park, split a bottle of sparkling water, and ordered 2 desserts. There was no first dance, no speeches, no drama. But as the waiter cleared the plates, Chandra caught something in Miles's eyes. A distance, a shift. He didn't look at her like a man whose world had just changed. He looked satisfied, but not stunned. She leaned forward, fingers interlaced. You okay? She asked. He shrugged. Yeah. Why wouldn't I be? No second thoughts. He smiled. None. You? She hesitated. No, but in the back of her mind, something whispered. That was too smooth. There had been no fight from him, no debate about waiting, no questions about family or rings or merging futures. He'd agreed too quickly, like the decision meant less than she thought it would. But she silenced the voice. She told herself it was just nerves, that maybe this was what peace looked like. No drama, no resistance, just agreement. Later that night, they curled up in bed, and he fell asleep first. Chandra stared at the ceiling for a long time, listening to the sound of his breathing, trying to convince herself this was what love was supposed to feel like. But deep down, she already knew. A man who agrees too easily often has something else in his head, and it would only be a matter of time before the cracks began to show. Chandra found out she was pregnant on a rainy morning in October. She stood barefoot in the bathroom, the white stick in her hand like a quiet verdict. The second line appeared before she even finished counting. Clear, bold, undeniable. She stared at it for a full minute, not afraid, not panicked, just still. Then she placed it on the counter, washed her hands, and walked out of the room. When she told Miles that evening, he blinked once, then smiled, wide, almost surprised. You're sure? I don't guess about things like this, she replied. He wrapped his arms around her, kissed her forehead. We're going to be parents, he whispered. It felt like a turning point. For a while, it was. He went to every appointment in the first trimester, held her hand during blood draws, argued with the pharmacy when they got her prenatal vitamins wrong. He Googled everything, down to how to fold hospital swaddles the correct way. He started sketching out a nursery layout in the guest room. Paint swatches, crib research, bassinet options. He even drafted a list of names, most of which made her laugh out loud. But under all the sweet gestures, something else was forming too. The deeper she got into the pregnancy, the more he pulled away from their conversations and pushed into his work. He began missing dinners, citing meetings that ran late. He answered emails while she talked about baby movements. He still kissed her stomach each night, but without looking her in the eyes. Chandra noticed. She noticed everything. Still, she didn't complain. She focused on her body, her baby, her routines. She let Miles spiral into whatever stress he claimed to be handling, and she quietly documented every kick and flutter in a journal she kept in her nightstand. BJ arrived early, 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Labor was fast, intense, but manageable. Her water broke at 3 a.m. Miles drove like a man possessed, parked crooked outside the entrance, ran around the car to open her door. At Northwestern Medicine Prentice Women's Hospital, they checked her in immediately. 6 hours later, Benjamin James Schaefer let out his first cry. He was perfect. Light caramel skin, tiny fists clenched like he was ready to fight the world. Chandra held him first. Miles cried. And for a few hours, nothing else existed. Not pressure, not differences, not silence. Just them. A family. The labor suite at Northwestern Medicine Prentice Women's Hospital looked more like a modern hotel room than a place where lives began and almost ended. Soft light filtered through wide windows. Equipment was tucked neatly behind panels. The walls were painted in muted tones. Everything felt curated to keep panic at bay. Chandra lay on the bed, propped up by pillows, her hands resting on her swollen stomach. A nurse adjusted the monitor strapped across her belly, while another checked her chart. "You're progressing fast," the first nurse said. "You'll meet your baby soon." Chandra nodded. Calm, focused. She didn't cry, didn't scream. Every contraction hit like a wave, but she gripped the rail and breathed through them, her mind sharper than ever. Miles stood near the window, pacing. He wasn't calm, not even close. His hands shook each time he looked at her. He asked too many questions, tried to take control of decisions that didn't belong to him. At one point, he snapped at the nurse when she suggested Chandra labor on her side. "She said she's comfortable on her back," he barked. Chandra shot him a look that said, "Enough." Miles stepped back, sat in the corner, and stayed quiet, for once. A few hours later, the doctor entered. It was time. The lights over the bed brightened. Nurses moved like clockwork. Instructions were short and clear. Chandra closed her eyes and centered herself. She didn't cry out. She pushed. Twice. And then, at exactly 10:42 a.m., Benjamin James let out a fierce, piercing cry. The sound cracked something inside her. A nurse placed him on her chest, and Chandra stared down at the tiny face pressed against her skin. He was warm, breathing fast, eyes closed. His cry faded as she whispered, "Hi." Miles stood frozen for a second, then stepped forward, tears in his eyes. "God," he said. "He looks like you," she finished. BJ's nose, his mouth, even the small line between his brows, it was all Miles. But the calm in his face when he settled against her, that was Chandra. They stayed like that for nearly an hour. No photos, no video calls, no announcements. Just 3 people in a room too quiet for the size of the moment. Later in recovery, Miles posted a cropped picture of BJ's hand in his. No caption, no tags, just a symbol. To the world, it was the beginning of a family. To Chandra, it was the beginning of something else. A slow unraveling. The change started small. 3 weeks after BJ came home, Miles returned to the office. He told Chandra it was just for a few hours, that he needed to check on things, reassure the board, catch up, but a few hours turned into entire days. By the second month, he was sleeping in the guest room to avoid waking the baby. By the third, he was spending nights at client dinners. "It's business," he said. "You know how it is." Yes, she did. She just didn't expect to watch him disappear so quickly from the thing they built together. He stopped asking how she felt. He stopped noticing when she hadn't eaten. He stopped holding BJ like he used to, always claiming he was too tired or too busy or not good with newborns. But he had plenty of energy for press releases, plenty of time for expanding his team, plenty of passion when discussing the new investors he wanted to bring in. Chandra sat across from him one evening as he tapped furiously on his laptop. BJ was asleep in her arms. The living room glowed in the soft light of a nearby lamp. "You missed his first smile," she said quietly. Miles didn't look up. "You got a picture?" "That's not the point." He sighed. "You act like I'm out gambling. I'm running a company, Chandra. So am I. she said. "But I still make time to hold my son." That made him pause. He set the laptop aside and stood, rubbing his temples. "We're not the same." She looked at him. "You're right," she said. "We're not." From there, the distance widened. He became colder. Conversations became logistical, transactional. He would speak at conferences, his voice full of ambition. But at home, he was flat, dismissive, short-tempered. One night, he tossed a sleek black folder on the kitchen island. Inside were designs for a new office wing, floor-to-ceiling windows, his initials etched into the corner glass. Chandra flipped through the pages slowly. "You spent 6 figures on design mock-ups?" "Brand matters," he said. She looked at him carefully. "What about legacy?" He didn't answer, because legacy for Miles had become about power, about perception, about building something so loud it drowned out the silence at home. He didn't realize that while he was chasing recognition from the world, his wife was watching the man she once respected fade into someone unfamiliar. And for Chandra, nothing was colder than being in the same room with the man who used to hold her like a priority, only to now speak to her like a project he no longer had time to finish. It started with a bottle, a wine bottle, unopened, sitting on the kitchen counter late one Friday night. Chandra had ordered it 2 months ago, a limited release from a black-owned vineyard in Napa. It arrived that morning in a sleek wooden box, engraved with her name. She was excited to try it, maybe even with Miles. But when she walked into the kitchen, Miles was already there, pouring himself a different wine. One of the overpriced bottles he always bragged about to his friends. He didn't even acknowledge the package sitting next to him. "You didn't open it?" she asked, motioning to the box. Miles didn't look up, didn't think it was for me. "It wasn't," she said, "but I thought we could share it." He glanced at her, then back at his glass. "I've got something better." Chandra stared at him. "That's the problem with you, always chasing what looks better." That got his attention. He leaned against the counter, wine swirling in his glass. "Where's this coming from?" "You've been gone, Miles. Not physically, maybe, but mentally, emotionally, you're barely here." He laughed once, short and sharp. "You make it sound like I'm some kind of villain for working." "No, but you act like your time is more valuable than mine." "I'm building a legacy," he said. Chandra crossed her arms. "And I'm raising your son, our son," he corrected. "And don't act like you're doing this alone. You've got help, nannies, assistants, you've got time." She felt heat rising. "Because I planned for it, because I'm used to handling my own." He scoffed. "Oh, here we go." The independent woman's speech. "You've been disrespectful for months," she snapped. "I've let it slide. But not tonight." He tilted his head. "What are you even mad about? That I work? That I built something?" "I've built things too," she said, her voice steady. "You just never cared to ask." He rolled his eyes. "Right. Your little design agency." She cut him off. "Watch your mouth." He smirked. "Relax. I'm not insulting you. I'm just saying, be real. You got lucky. You married up." There it was, the one sentence that flipped the air in the room. Chandra stepped closer. "Say that again." He shrugged, sipping his wine. "You heard me." She stared at him. "You think I married up? You got the Schaefer name, didn't you?" Chandra laughed, low and dangerous. "Baby," she said, walking past him toward the living room, "I wiped my ass with Schaefer stock options 10 years ago." He froze. The room went silent. She didn't stop walking, because that moment, those words, confirmed everything. This man didn't know who he married, and that wasn't her fault. It was his failure to look deeper. Miles didn't speak for nearly a full minute after she said it. He stood frozen near the sink, wine glass in hand, staring at Chandra like she had just morphed into someone else. Chandra didn't blink. She walked over to the kitchen island, pulled open the drawer where they kept unopened mail, and slid out a single envelope, thicker than the rest. Inside, sealed and crisp, was the quarterly statement for a holding company Miles didn't even know existed. She tossed it onto the counter beside him. "Go ahead," she said. "Open it." He hesitated. "Miles," she said firmly, "you wanted real. That's real." He opened the envelope. The paper inside bore the logo of Bordeaux Management Holdings, one of the quiet forces in private equity circles. It was a name whispered in conference rooms, never attached to a face. The numbers on the page were not small. 8 figures in quarterly earnings. breakdown of subsidiaries, names of firms he'd heard of. A few he'd tried to invest in himself. His fingers tightened on the page. "What is this?" he asked. Chandra poured herself a glass of water. "A glimpse," she replied. "You said you worked in marketing." "I do," she said. "I just never said whose." He looked up. "You lied." She raised an eyebrow. "No, you assumed." Miles set the paper down slowly, as if it burned. "You're telling me you've been sitting on this the whole time?" "No," she said. "I've been building it. Quietly, deliberately, long before I met you. Why didn't you say anything?" She took a sip from her glass. "Because I wanted to see if you could love the woman who had nothing. And now I see I gave the benefit of the doubt to someone who never earned it." Miles stepped back, shaking his head. "So this is some kind of power play?" "No," she said. "This is me reminding you that I was never beneath you. Not once." He looked down at the statement again, then back at her. "Why show me now?" She met his eyes. "Because I needed to know how small you'd talk to me before realizing how big I actually am." He swallowed hard. "Is this everything?" She smiled. "That's the funny part." "What?" "That's not even the top layer." And with that, she took the paper from his hand, folded it neatly, and placed it back in the envelope. She walked past him, calm, unbothered, because she hadn't shown him power, she'd shown him mercy. The following Monday, Chandra walked into an office she hadn't visited in over a year, but that had always kept her chair warm. 5th floor, frosted glass, no signage on the door. People assumed her lawyer was a man. Power suit, shiny shoes, maybe gray hair, and a reputation. They were wrong. Her lawyer was a black woman named Erica Johnson, Yale-educated, brilliant, and unbothered by theatrics. They met over a decade ago in D.C. and had only grown sharper with time. Erica didn't offer pleasantries when Chandra walked in. "You ready?" she asked, gesturing to the seat across from her. Chandra nodded, setting her structured bag on the floor. "I've been ready. I just didn't want to believe I had to do this." Erica slid a folder across the table. "Prenup solid. You're covered. But if we play this smart, we don't need to get messy." Chandra opened the folder, scanned the pages quickly. "Primary custody. I'm not asking for support. I don't want his money. I want clarity." "You'll have it," Erica said. "He has no idea what's coming." Chandra looked up. Good, because she wasn't angry anymore. Anger had burned through her the night he stood in their kitchen and implied she had married up. Now, she was focused. She didn't want revenge. She wanted separation. Emotional, legal, financial, total. "I'll give him grace," she said. "He can keep his house, his firm, his pride." Erica smirked. "He won't keep his composure. That's his burden." Chandra stood, closing the folder. "Send the papers by Friday." Erica raised a brow. "That soon?" "He laughed in my face," Chandra said, gathering her bag. "I've waited long enough." She walked out of the office like a woman late to a lunch meeting, not a woman dissolving a marriage. No tears, no shaky breath, just precision. She didn't call Miles, didn't text, didn't warn him, because if he was bold enough to insult her in her own kitchen, he should be prepared to read her silence in legal print. BJ would be protected, her assets untouched, her name intact. As she stepped into the elevator, her phone buzzed. A message from Miles. "Dinner tonight? Thought we could reset." She stared at it for a moment, then locked the screen. She didn't need a reset. She needed closure, and she'd already started writing it, with her signature. In ink. Cook County Circuit Court didn't look like power. It looked like routine. Beige walls, echoing footsteps, the stale scent of old paper and polished shoes. But today, in courtroom 4C, everything was different. Everyone felt it. The tension wasn't loud, it was quiet, controlled, waiting to detonate. Chandra arrived before the room filled. Her heels clicked softly against the floor, steady, not rushed. She wore a black sheath dress that hugged her frame without demanding attention. Her hair was pulled into a low, sleek bun. No jewelry beyond small diamond studs and a thin silver bracelet on her wrist. She greeted her attorney, Erica, with a nod and sat. Not in the back, not in the front, just far enough to observe everything. Her posture still, her face unreadable. To someone unfamiliar, she looked like any other woman facing divorce proceedings, calm, perhaps nervous. But those who truly watched her would notice something else. She wasn't preparing to fight. She was preparing to finish. Across the room, the opposing counsel shuffled papers at a walnut table. Behind him, 2 junior associates whispered, glancing at the door every few seconds. They were waiting. For Miles. And for Victoria. At 9:01 a.m., they entered. Miles Schaefer strolled into the courtroom like a man who'd already won. His suit, charcoal gray, tailored perfectly. Watch, vintage Rolex. Smile, wide and unearned. He walked with the confidence of a man who believed the room worked for him. Victoria was right behind him, in a beige blazer with gold accents, and a pearl necklace that probably belonged to her mother's mother. She didn't smile. She scanned the courtroom as if inspecting property. Miles saw Chandra and nodded once, smug. Chandra didn't nod back. She looked at him the same way she'd looked at men who offered to buy her companies with checks too small. Tired, unimpressed, done. They sat across from her. The judge entered a few minutes later, his voice sharp as he called the court to order. The rustle of paper died instantly. All phones were silenced. All eyes turned forward. This was the moment most people dread, the public dissection of a private life. But Chandra wasn't afraid of it. She wasn't hiding anything. She had already lived the reality of being disregarded in her own home. This was documentation. And the court? It would simply be the place where truth was filed permanently. No fireworks, no shouting, just facts. And before the hour was over, those facts would erase everything Miles thought he knew about the woman sitting quietly across from him. Miles didn't come to court for fairness. He came for a show. He'd prepped for this day like it was a press conference. New suit, fresh cut, polished shoes. His cologne lingered in the air, subtle but bold. He wanted to look like a man who had nothing to lose and everything to protect. His gait screamed confidence. Every step calculated, every nod to the court staff intentional. He didn't speak to Chandra, didn't even look at her for long, just a passing glance and a smirk, like he'd already decided how the day would go. Victoria matched him beat for beat. She sat beside him like a senator's wife. Hands folded, back straight, lips tight with poise. Her pearls glinted under the courtroom lighting. She wore a neutral expression, but it didn't mask the gleam of victory she thought was coming. To Victoria, this wasn't just about the divorce. It was about reasserting the family name, reigning in a mistake. She had convinced herself that Chandra was a phase, a complication, a lesson Miles needed to learn before settling down with someone appropriate. This courtroom, in her mind, was the final stage of that learning process, the end of the experiment. She whispered something to Miles as they sat down. He chuckled, low and dismissive. Their lawyer leaned in, updating them on procedural order. Miles nodded lazily, scanning the room like a man who owned more than anyone else present. His eyes settled on the judge, then on the court clerk, then finally back on Chandra. She didn't blink. He raised his brows, barely noticeable, as if to say, "You sure you want this?" She tilted her head. Barely, as if to answer, "You're about to find out." Across the aisle, Erica remained composed. Her notes were already organized, color-coded tabs marking key disclosures. She didn't whisper. She didn't fidget. She simply waited, because they didn't come to perform. They came to deliver. Miles pulled out his phone before the session began, checking it one more time, likely texting someone to confirm his availability for dinner later. Victoria adjusted her blazer, smoothing a wrinkle that wasn't there. They believed the story they'd written for this moment, that Chandra would walk away with enough to stay quiet, that she'd beg for a sliver of stability, that she'd ask for child support like she needed it. They believed she was only now realizing the cost of walking away. What they didn't know was that the woman sitting across from them hadn't come to collect anything. She came to expose everything. Chandra didn't need to prove anything. That was the difference. She walked into the courtroom with the calm of someone who had already seen the end from the beginning. No entourage, no stylist, no flair, just presence. She wore a black dress, tailored, knee-length, sleeveless. It hugged her body with precision, not extravagance. Her heels were clean, pointed, silent. Not a scuff on them. Her makeup was soft but polished. Not to impress, to maintain. Every inch of her was intentional, but never loud. The woman who once pulled back to keep a man comfortable had officially stepped out, and she wasn't stepping back in. She walked past Miles without pausing, didn't glance his way, didn't acknowledge Victoria's long, judging stare. She simply walked to her table, nodded at Erica, and sat with her back straight and her legs crossed. She didn't pull out her phone. She didn't fidget. She was already centered. Erica whispered, "Everything's in place." Chandra nodded once. "Good." That was it. There was no dramatics, no deep breath, no visible nerves, because this wasn't a battle for her. This was documentation. This was truth, filed on record. From across the courtroom, Victoria watched her, really watched her. And for the first time in all their interactions, she didn't look superior. She looked unsure. Miles, however, still wore that smirk. He leaned toward his lawyer, murmuring something that made the man chuckle quietly. Maybe it was about the custody filing. Maybe it was about the alimony Chandra didn't request. Maybe it was about the figure they'd offer to make her go away quietly. Whatever it wasn't grounded in reality, because the woman across from him didn't come for a slice. She came with the whole pie already baked and ready to flip the table. When the judge entered and called the court to order, Chandra's eyes didn't leave the bench. She wasn't watching her ex. She wasn't watching his mother. She wasn't there for them. This was for her son, for her peace, for the version of herself who once believed love alone would be enough. The judge began with the basics: roll call, confirmation of identities, brief background of the case. Miles's lawyer stood, announced their readiness, and sat like he expected things to be over by lunch. Chandra's posture didn't change. She listened, waited, because the room still didn't know what was coming. But she did. And the difference between her and everyone else? She never needed the drama. She was the conclusion. When Chandra's attorney stood, the room leaned in, though no one said a word. Erica adjusted her glasses, clasped her hands behind her back, and spoke with the calm cadence of someone who wasn't trying to prove anything, just clarify facts. "Your Honor," she began, "our client, Chandra Ellison Schaefer, seeks the following: full legal custody of the minor child, visitation parameters, for the father to be determined in mediation, no spousal support, and a one-time financial closing statement of $50,000. $50,000. Miles blinked. He leaned slightly toward his lawyer, then mouthed the words, "That's it?" Victoria glanced sideways, hiding a faint smile. Even the judge raised an eyebrow. "No spousal support?" he asked, looking over his glasses. "Correct," Erica said. "Mrs. Schaefer has declined any monthly settlement or asset distribution from her spouse's holdings." A murmur fluttered behind them, just one or two cleared throats and whispered reactions, but Chandra didn't move. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, her face neutral. The offer sounded generous. Too generous. To those watching, it seemed like a woman taking the high road. A mother who just wanted peace. A wife who didn't want to drag things out. Even Miles sat up a little straighter. The arrogance returned to his posture. His lawyer whispered, "You might be walking away cleaner than we thought." Victoria let out the smallest exhale, pleased. The courtroom clerk looked puzzled. The judge made a note on the file. "All right," he said. "That's unusual, but certainly you're right. Shall we proceed to the financial disclosure segment?" Erica smiled politely. "Yes, Your Honor. We provided full financial disclosures for both parties in the court's pre-filed packets, but at your request, we are prepared to read them into record." "Proceed," the judge said, waving a hand. Erica stepped forward and opened a red folder with silver tabs. "On record, Miles Schaefer, current CEO and controlling partner of Schaefer Logistics Group, has declared liquid assets totaling $12.8 million, with additional holdings in real estate, equity funds, and deferred income plans, totaling approximately $512.4 million. Miles sat taller. That number sounded good out loud. His face returned to a light grin, smug and secure. "Mrs. Schaefer's assets," Erica continued, "are itemized on the next page." She turned it over. Silence. Then she read it, and the room went still. "Mrs. Schaefer's assets include the following," Erica began, her tone steady, almost bored. "Full ownership of Bordeaux Equity, a multinational private firm with holdings in venture capital, private, debt, and emerging markets, valued at $7.2 billion as of the last fiscal year." Miles blinked. "72% ownership of West Point Shipping, Current valuation, $1.6 billion. Victoria flinched. Majority silent shareholder in 3 Silicon Valley unicorn startups, 2 of which are currently in IPO preparation stages. Combined stake value, approximately $750 million. The court stenographer stopped typing. Additionally, Mrs. Schaefer holds 14 commercial real estate properties, 6 in the continental U.S., 3 in the UAE, 2 in South Korea, 2 in Germany, and 1 in Lagos, Nigeria. Total property value assessed at $116 million. One of the junior attorneys from Miles's side dropped her pen. Erica didn't pause. She flipped another tab. She has 0 debts, 0 joint financial entanglements with Mr. Schaefer, and has already filed documents transferring all marital property back to her name, given that the properties were initially purchased through Bordeaux Equity Shell Acquisitions. All disclosures are certified, verified by Price and Lisk, and time-stamped prior to the marriage. The judge looked up. You're telling me that the petitioner, Mrs. Schaefer, Erica said smoothly, is independently worth just over $9.6 billion. Silence. Thick, awkward, unrelenting. Miles's smirk vanished. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Victoria's eyes darted around the courtroom like she was searching for oxygen. Her hand clutched her pearl necklace so tightly it looked like it might snap. The opposing counsel leaned toward Miles. "Why didn't you know this?" he whispered. I thought she worked in marketing." Chandra remained seated, still, calm. The judge finally cleared his throat. "Well, that changes the perception of this case significantly." Miles's lawyer stood, flustered. "Your Honor, given the sudden revelation, we request—" "You'll have your time," the judge cut in. "But for now, we're proceeding." And just like that, the courtroom no longer saw Chandra as the elegant, humble woman asking for custody and peace. They saw her for what she truly was, powerful, precise, and 10 steps ahead. The moment the judge leaned back in his chair, the temperature of the entire courtroom changed. What had started as a routine custody and divorce hearing now felt like a hostile takeover. Eyes flicked back and forth between Miles and Chandra. People in the pews no longer looked at her as the woman who married up, but the woman who had married down. Whispers buzzed like static through the rows. A few reporters who'd quietly slipped in for a routine society piece were now furiously texting under the bench. The bailiff had to call for order. Twice. But Chandra didn't blink. She didn't need to. Everything about her demeanor said, "I knew this would happen." She hadn't come here to humiliate anyone, but she also wasn't going to apologize for being what she had always been, exceptional. Miles sat still, his jaw tight. It was the same look he wore during board meetings when someone delivered bad projections. Only this time, the loss wasn't a number on a spreadsheet. It was his ego, his illusion, his grip on the narrative. Victoria was ghost pale. For years, she had told anyone who would listen that her son married someone decent from a working background, someone trainable, someone who would stay in her place. That woman didn't exist, and the room now knew it. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Schaefer, you may respond." Miles stood slowly. "Your Honor, with respect, this disclosure is surprising. I wasn't aware of the full extent of my wife's financial position." "That would seem to be the case," the judge replied dryly. "We believe this calls for a reevaluation of terms," Miles's lawyer interjected, trying to salvage ground, "given the imbalance in net worth." Erica raised a hand. "My client is not asking for anything, not a dime, not spousal support, not assets. She's requesting full custody based on emotional availability, stability, and safety, not finances." The judge nodded. "She's well within her rights." Chandra finally spoke. One line. "I didn't come here to win, Your Honor. I came to finish." The judge looked directly at her. "And you did." The entire room knew. She hadn't just ended a marriage. She had ended their illusion of control. Miles didn't move. He just stared at Chandra like he was seeing her for the first time. His jaw was clenched, then suddenly slack, hanging slightly, like his body had forgotten how to hold his pride. The room didn't feel like his anymore. Not the court. Not the name on the case file. Not even his own skin. This wasn't the woman he mocked. This wasn't the woman he left in tears on their balcony 6 months ago, accusing her of being lucky to have his name. This woman had just shattered his narrative, and he couldn't do anything to stop it. Victoria trembled. Her hands, once steady and control, now shook as she reached for her water bottle. but her mouth remained tight, defiant. Even when her world was burning, she didn't know how to surrender. "How long have you known about this?" she whispered to Miles. He didn't answer. Because the truth was, he hadn't known anything. He hadn't known who Chandra was. He hadn't known how she'd built her empire long before he ever kissed her. He hadn't known that the woman he dismissed, insulted, and belittled at home could buy and sell the very boardroom he worshipped. Victoria finally spoke to the court, louder now. "This doesn't change the fact that she deceived us all." Chandra raised her eyes. "I didn't lie," she said clearly. "I just never told you what wasn't your business." The judge cut in. "Mrs. Schaefer is under no legal obligation to disclose her private holdings prior to marriage, particularly when there is no request for shared marital assets." Victoria turned toward her son, furious. "She played you." Miles stood. "No, I played myself." The courtroom stilled again. He looked over at Chandra, and for a moment his face softened, humiliation now mixed with something deeper. Regret. "You asked me once why I married you so quickly," he said across the courtroom, voice cracking. "It wasn't because I thought you were convenient. It was because I knew if I waited too long, I'd never have the courage to admit I didn't deserve you." Chandra didn't flinch. She didn't owe him grace anymore. His words came too late. Her silence was louder than his apology, and it echoed longer. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't pound the table. She didn't even blink. But when the numbers dropped, and the silence swallowed the room whole, Chandra Bordeaux Schaffer didn't just win the case. She ended their illusion of superiority. Every sneer, every backhanded compliment, every dinner where Victoria spoke over her, every night Miles used her calm as proof of compliance. Gone. There was no denying her now, no reducing her to a background character in a family dynasty that couldn't keep up. She had walked into court without asking for anything beyond her child, and left owning the narrative they had once weaponized against her. Victoria, once the face of control, now looked like the cautionary tale. Her posture stiff, her eyes darting, her hand fumbling in that oversized leather bag for anything, papers, lip balm, a distraction. But there was no hiding from this. The world had turned upside down. The woman they thought needed them never did. Chandra didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She didn't even look at Victoria again. She was above it. Instead, she turned toward her lawyer and gave a small nod. It wasn't a signal of revenge. It was confirmation that her dignity had remained intact from beginning to end, that in a room full of people who once doubted her, she never had to beg to be seen. She let the truth speak. She let the facts sting. And when the smoke cleared, she remained untouched. The judge brought the court to order again, but the atmosphere had changed. The power had shifted, and everyone knew who held it now. From the benches to the marble floor, people were whispering her name, not because of scandal, not because of gossip, but because they saw her, a woman who never used her bank account to buy respect, a mother who didn't weaponize her child, a professional who built something massive and chose to keep it private, not petty. As Chandra stood to leave, she adjusted her coat. Not rushed, not dramatic. Calm and clean, her walk to the door was a message. She didn't have to prove anything. She had already won. And not just in court, in life. Because some victories aren't loud. They're quiet, sharp, permanent. And when the dust settles, those who doubted you are left standing in the ruins of their own assumptions. The rain hadn't stopped for hours. Streets of the Gold Coast glistened under the amber glow of the city's nightlights. Chandra stood by the glass wall of her penthouse, sipping green tea, wrapped in a robe of soft ivory silk. BJ was already asleep in the nursery down the hall. The silence of her space was earned, intentional, until a sudden buzz broke it. The concierge's voice came through the intercom. "Ma'am, there's a Mr. Miles Schaefer downstairs. He says it's urgent." Chandra didn't flinch. "Send him up," she said, her voice cool. Minutes later, a knock hit the door, heavy and desperate. When she opened it, Miles stood there, soaked through his shirt. His eyes were glassy, lips slack, and the bottle of something brown in his hand confirmed the scent of whiskey trailing behind him. "Don't slam the door," he murmured, voice cracking. "Please." She stepped aside without a word. The moment he entered, the shift was immediate. The quiet elegance of her penthouse wrapped around him like judgment. Every inch screamed power he never saw. Every art piece, every custom wood finish, every silent ticking of a $20,000 watch on the side table, proof he had never been the prize. "You lied to me," he muttered, pacing. Chandra folded her arms, watching him. "You came to my court, wearing my ring, standing next to my mother, and I had no idea I was marrying someone who could buy the whole damn courthouse." "You didn't ask," she replied calmly. "You just assumed." He turned, face flushed. "I told you things, real things. I told you I was tired. I told you I wanted something honest. And you wanted to own something you didn't understand," she cut in. "That's not my fault." He blinked hard, breath trembling. "I didn't come here to fight." Chandra leaned against the marble kitchen island, arms still crossed. "Then why did you come?" He stared at her, eyes hollow. "Because I lost everything today. Everything I thought I was. My name, my legacy, my power." She raised a brow. "And you thought you'd come crawl back to the woman you mocked?" "No," he said, voice low. "I came because I saw your face when the judge read that number. You weren't gloating. You looked sad, like it broke you too." Her breath caught. For a second, then she looked away. "Miles, you don't even know what you broke." He walked closer. "Then tell me." She shook her head. "Once you're drunk. And I'm tired." But he didn't move. "I need to know who you are," he whispered. "Please." She stared into his eyes, seeing the man he once was, and the one who had buried him. This wasn't the same Miles, but neither was she the same Chandra. They stood in the quiet, a war stalled by memory. And still, neither one walked away. Miles wandered deeper into the penthouse, dripping rainwater onto the hardwood floor, shoulders sagging like a man who hadn't slept in days. Chandra didn't offer a towel. He didn't ask. He stumbled toward the living room and dropped into a chair that cost more than his Porsche's monthly payment. His eyes were red, but not from the whiskey. "You really let me sit there like a clown, huh?" His words were slurred but sharp. "You let me walk into that courtroom thinking I had the upper hand, knowing damn well you could buy 10 of me and not blink." Chandra stood by the kitchen, still wrapped in her silk robe, unmoved. "I didn't owe you a warning." He chuckled bitterly. "No, you just owed me the truth. At least once. I gave you more truth than you gave me," she said. "You lied about respect, about loyalty, about commitment." His voice rose. "I gave you everything I had." "No, Miles," she said, walking toward him. "You gave me crumbs and expected me to feel full. You thought I'd be grateful to sit next to your mother and smile while she belittled me. You thought you were the prize." He stood, swaying slightly, eyes glossy with anger and something softer he couldn't name. "You think I didn't love you? I think you loved how I made you feel, not who I am." "That's not fair." Chandra's jaw tightened. "Fair would have been you seeing me, supporting me, protecting me from your family. Instead, you let them treat me like a burden." He ran a hand through his wet hair, pacing the room now. "I was under pressure. The company, the shareholders, my father's board. And I was under you," she snapped. "In every way. And still, I stood taller." He froze, turning to face her. The fury faded a little. "Do you know how small I felt," he whispered, "when I heard them say your net worth, how the entire courtroom turned? I wasn't the man anymore. You were." "You never were," Chandra replied. "You just had the mic longer." He looked at her like a man trying to swallow truth that burned going down. "You humiliated me." "No," she said, stepping closer. "You humiliated yourself when you forgot who I was. You made me the villain in your story to protect your pride." He collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. "I didn't come here to beg," he mumbled, "but I didn't come to lose either." "You already lost," she whispered, walking past him. "You just didn't notice until today." The clock ticked. Rain tapped the windows. Miles sat in her living room like a stranger in his own past. Miles didn't move from the couch. His breath came slower now, like his body was finally registering the weight of the moment. Chandra stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, arms crossed, her reflection a silhouette against the Chicago skyline. Her voice sliced the silence. "You know what haunts me most?" He looked up. "That I kept hoping you'd show up different, kinder, better. And every time you showed up smaller." Miles clenched his jaw. "Don't act like you didn't lie too. You made me believe you were figuring things out, that you needed help building something." "I never asked you to build anything for me," she shot back. "I just wanted partnership. I wanted honesty. But the moment I stopped needing your money, you stopped respecting me. That's not true. No? You accused me of being lucky to be a shaffer, like I married up. You mocked me in front of our son. Miles stood, pacing. I was insecure, all right. You outgrew me before I knew what you were. Every time I looked at you, I saw a woman who didn't need me, and it killed me. She turned. So instead of rising to meet me, you dragged me down. You used love like a leash. His voice cracked. I didn't know how to love someone like you. Chandra stepped closer, eyes locked on his. Someone like me? You walk into a room and change its temperature. You don't ask for permission. You don't wait to be chosen. I've never known a woman who could look at me and not flinch, even when I was wrong. That's what love is supposed to do, she said. Call out the rot, push for better. But you ran from that. He shook his head. You don't get it. Every man wants to be the hero in his home. You made me feel forgettable. She blinked. Miles stepped closer. I know I messed up. I know I threw away something sacred. But please, don't act like it was all bad. Chandra's voice softened. It wasn't. That's what hurts most. He touched her wrist, eyes pleading. Can't we just reset? No. She stepped back. This isn't about starting over. This is about finishing the chapter. His voice dropped to a whisper. Do you miss me? She didn't hesitate. I miss who I thought you were. That crushed him more than a scream ever could. They stood in silence. The space between them tight with history. Longing throbbed in the air. He looked at her lips, her eyes, her posture that had always made him feel both wanted and warned. She didn't stop him when he stepped closer. Didn't flinch when his fingers brushed her collarbone. Desire lingered beneath the ruins, but it wasn't enough to erase the damage. The first kiss wasn't soft. It wasn't slow. It was desperate. Miles gripped Chandra's waist, pulling her close like he could erase time with his touch. Her lips met his without hesitation, but the fire between them burned differently now. It wasn't the rush of new lust or the ease of love. It was all tension, control, unfinished business. She led him to the bedroom like she owned the floor beneath his feet. And she did. The room was dim, framed in city light bleeding through the windows. Expensive sheets, cool air, a silence only broken by the sound of his shirt tearing open as her hands pulled at him like he was both a mistake and a memory. He grabbed her neck gently, eyes searching hers. Tell me to stop if you don't want this. I want this, she breathed. But don't confuse it. Their mouths collided again. Her fingers tugged at his belt. He slid her silk robe off her shoulders. She stood before him in nothing but a lace thong, and he paused, like he needed to memorize her all over again. Chandra didn't wait. She pushed him onto the bed, climbed on top, and kissed down his chest, slow at first, then with a hunger that tasted like payback. Miles groaned beneath her, hands roaming. You're angry, he said through gritted teeth. Good, she whispered. Let it fuel you. And he did. They moved together like a storm, fast, rough, eyes locked as if each thrust might erase all the words they'd ever thrown in anger. His hands tangled in her curls. Her nails dug into his back. They didn't speak. Their bodies screamed everything. She moaned into his mouth when he lifted her hips and drove deeper. He whispered her name like a prayer, sweat dripping down his spine. They kissed between breaths, between stings of regret. She flipped him over, rode him hard, controlled the pace, controlled the rhythm. Every second a reminder, she was no man's mistake. His hand slid up her back. God, you feel like home. She leaned down, lips brushing his ear. That's what you ruined. And still, she didn't stop. Pleasure tangled with pain, heat blurred with history. They climaxed nearly in sync, both bodies shaking, both hearts splintered. He lay there, breathless. She slid off, pulled the sheets over her chest, and stared at the ceiling. He reached for her. She turned away. Don't, she said flatly. You had your chance. His hand fell. The silence now felt heavier than the moans that came before it. This wasn't about passion. It was the last dance between a man who didn't know how to keep her and a woman who was finally done teaching him. Miles sat at the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the floor. Chandra didn't move. She lay against the headboard, wrapped in soft linen, silent. Her body still hummed, but the fire in her veins wasn't lust, it was resolve. Miles finally spoke, voice rough. You always made me feel small. She laughed once, cold and short. No, I made you see how small you already were. You just hated the reflection. He turned to face her. I thought I was enough. You were never supposed to compete with me, Miles. You were supposed to stand beside me. He winced. So, you were just testing me? No, she said simply. I was hoping for honesty. I gave you the real me little by little. You gave me performance, power plays, and now, here you are. In my bed, in my house, looking like the boy who got caught cheating on a test. He stood up, pacing. I thought you were just ambitious. I didn't know you were smarter than you, wealthier, more dangerous. She interrupted. He looked at her. The woman who used to curl into his chest now sat upright, unbothered, untouchable. I never wanted to hurt you, he said quietly. You didn't think you could hurt me, she corrected. That was your first mistake. Miles walked toward the window, stared out at the skyline. You have everything now. I always did, she said. I just didn't need to prove it. The room went quiet again. The air between them wasn't charged like before. It was final. She rose, wrapping herself in a silk robe. Her voice stayed calm. You weren't the villain. You were the mirror. You showed me what I let slide, what I accepted in the name of love. But I won't do that again. He nodded, slow and pained. You're not going to forgive me, are you? Chandra stepped closer, looked him dead in the eyes. Forgiveness is earned. You haven't started that work. Miles swallowed hard. You still love me? She shrugged. Maybe. But love without respect is just performance. And I stopped performing when I signed those divorce papers. He exhaled, defeated. What do I do now? Be better, she said. Not for me. For our son. He looked at her like he wanted to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, he reached for his shirt on the floor, pulled it on, and walked to the door. He paused, hand on the handle. You changed me, he said without turning. No, she replied. I exposed you. And just like that he left, quiet this time. The door clicked shut. Silence returned, heavy and full. Chandra didn't move right away. She stood there, staring at the space where Miles had just been, her arms folded loosely over her chest. Her robe still hung open, her skin still warm, but there was no softness left in her eyes. She crossed the room, picked up the glass of water she hadn't touched, and walked to the window. Below her, Chicago's Gold Coast shimmered under the weight of midnight. Lights blinked, traffic murmured. Life went on, indifferent. BJ was asleep down the hall, unaware of the chaos that had brushed past his world tonight. Chandra ran her fingers through her curls and exhaled slowly. She didn't feel broken. She felt awake. When Miles had touched her earlier, there had been a moment, a flicker, where her body remembered, the way he used to hold her, the way his kisses once felt like promises. But now it just felt like echoes, old noise. He came back because he thought the revelation of her wealth gave him permission to try again, as if money was the reason she walked away, as if betrayal, disrespect, and neglect could be wiped out by his confusion in a night of sex. She finished the water, set the glass down, and pulled the robe tight around her waist. Then she walked back to the bed, picked up his belt, and tossed it on the chair by the door. A small act, but one that marked the end. Tomorrow she would take BJ to the museum. He loved the dinosaur exhibit. After that, ice cream and a walk by the lake. She would fill her day with meaning, not mourning, because what she had given Miles was love. Deep, honest love. And what he returned was control disguised as affection. He didn't lose her because she was secretive. He lost her because he was careless. Because he thought she would always stay no matter how little he gave in return. She stood at the foot of the bed and stared at the dent where he had sat. Then she whispered to no one, he thought I needed him to feel like a woman, but he never made me one. With a final glance at the quiet city outside, she turned off the lights. The bed felt cooler now. But it was hers. Fully. Freely. She was done being touched by hands that only remembered her when she walked away. And when sleep finally came, it wasn't heavy with regret. It was light with peace. 3 weeks had passed since that night. Miles had tried everything. Calls, flowers, messages filled with long-winded apologies. At one point, a grand gesture, a piano delivery to her building lobby, with a note to the woman whose silence still sings in my head. Chandra didn't flinch. She didn't delete the messages. She didn't block him. She simply ignored them. All of them. Her peace was too expensive to gamble on nostalgia. One Thursday afternoon, she sat on her balcony with a glass of hibiscus tea, watching BJ stack alphabet blocks on the floor inside. The doorbell rang, and the security guard's voice buzzed in. "Miss Bordeaux, a Mr. Miles Schaefer is downstairs. He insists on speaking with you." Chandra didn't look surprised. "Send him up." Just him. When he stepped into the penthouse, he was dressed in black jeans and a soft, cotton shirt, nothing like the designer suits he used to wear like armor. She didn't invite him to sit. "You still look at me like I'm the enemy," he said quietly. "I look at you like a man who couldn't recognize love while drowning in power," she replied. "I miss us." "There is no us, Miles. There's me. There's BJ. And then there's the man who laughed in court while trying to take both." He winced. "I was scared," he admitted. "You made me feel small, like I was never enough for you." Chandra stared at him. "So you tried to shrink me instead?" He didn't answer. "You don't get to apologize now because you finally realized what you lost," she said. "Love isn't a savings account you dip into when your ego runs dry." Miles took a step closer. "I'm not asking for us. Not yet. I just want the chance to show up for my son." Chandra narrowed her eyes. "You want access to BJ? You'll follow my rules, you'll honor my boundaries. And if I sense manipulation, the doors close, for good." He nodded slowly. "I know I failed as a husband," he said, "but I want to try not to fail as a father." Chandra didn't smile. She didn't soften, but she didn't say no. Instead, she stepped aside and pointed to BJ on the floor. "You have 30 minutes. Don't lie to him. Don't perform. Just listen." Miles looked at her with something close to gratitude. But Chandra didn't care for gratitude anymore. She cared about what came next. For her. For BJ. Not for him. The custody arrangement wasn't something Chandra left to chance. She had her legal team draft everything with precision. No overnight stays. All visits supervised. No international trips. All communications documented. Her lawyer delivered it to Miles with the same tone a surgeon uses when listing post-op restrictions. If you miss one pickup, if you speak against Miss Bordeaux in front of the child, if you try to manipulate the situation emotionally or financially, the lawyer said without blinking, you will be stripped of every access point you currently have. Miles had signed it, reluctantly, not because he agreed, but because he knew fighting would mean losing BJ altogether. Still, reality hit hard. Gone were the days when he could swing by on impulse, whisk BJ off to his country home, or FaceTime whenever he felt guilty. Now, every interaction happened under Chandra's watchful eye, or one of her carefully vetted caregivers. Her assistant Kira often sat nearby during visits, noting tone, length, and behavior. Miles once asked, "Don't you trust me even a little?" Chandra answered flatly, "Not with my child, not with my peace." The first few visits were awkward. Miles didn't know BJ's favorite snacks. He didn't remember the cartoon theme song BJ loved to hum while coloring. He asked too many questions, trying too hard. BJ barely spoke at first. But Chandra, though distant, wasn't cruel. She wanted her son to have a chance, if Miles earned it. One afternoon, BJ built a train track set across the living room floor. Miles leaned down awkwardly. "What station are we at now?" he asked. BJ looked at him, then at the tracks. "Chicago. And where are we going?" BJ pointed. "Mama's tower." Chandra, sitting silently at the kitchen island, heard it all. After each visit, Miles left a short note, never addressed to her directly, just words scribbled on lined paper left on the table. BJ asked me if whales sleep. I Googled it. They do. He beat me in Uno today. 4 games in a row. He laughs like you when he wins. Loud, confident. She never responded, but she read every note. The distance between them was no longer emotional. It was administrative. Miles had become a scheduled visitor, a weekly guest in a home he once imagined building. And Chandra? She remained unmoved, because control wasn't about punishment. It was protection. For BJ, for her peace, and for the woman who would never again hand over her power in the name of love. It was a Saturday. BJ had just finished building a Lego replica of the John Hancock building on the living room rug. He was proud of it, too proud to let anyone help, even Miles. Chandra sat on the couch with her laptop, pretending to work. Truthfully, she was watching, always watching. Miles knelt beside BJ, watching him place the final block. "That's impressive," he said softly. "You're brilliant." BJ barely looked up. I know. Mama tells me. Miles smiled. Bittersweet. You get that from her? Chandra closed her laptop. You're right, she said, her tone clipped but calm. He is brilliant. Like me. Miles stood. He shoved his hands into his pockets, rocking on his heels. He's going to be something, Chandra. She didn't blink. He already is. There was a pause, long, heavy. Then Miles looked at her and said, He's brilliant, like you. Chandra stared at him for a beat. Then said, clearly and without emotion, He's nothing like you. Miles's jaw twitched. She stood slowly and walked to her son, resting her hand gently on his shoulder. He doesn't hurt what he loves, she added, her voice firm but not loud. BJ didn't understand the weight of the sentence, but Miles did. He stepped closer. I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know how to be with you. I wasn't built for... Chandra raised her hand. Don't explain now. You knew how to love yourself. You knew how to build your brand, run your empire, entertain society, manipulate boardrooms. She tilted her head. But when it came to me, you acted like I was a storm you had to survive. I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid I wasn't enough. She gave a sharp, soft laugh. So you tried to make me feel small? Miles swallowed hard. Yes. BJ pushed a red block into place and smiled to himself, lost in his world. Chandra leaned down and kissed her son's curls. He doesn't have to shrink for anyone, she said. Not even for love. Miles looked at the boy. I'll never let him feel that way. Chandra met his gaze. Then be better. But not for me. For him. There was no forgiveness in her tone. Just instruction. Just clarity. Because her grace didn't look like reunion. It looked like boundaries. And she was finally keeping them. The next morning, Miles arrived early. It wasn't scheduled. Chandra opened the door in a robe, satin tied tight, her expression blank. You're early. I brought the art supplies BJ mentioned last week, he said, lifting a bag from Blick Art Materials. He said he wanted oil pastels. She glanced at the bag, then stepped aside. He's in his room. You've got an hour. I have a call at 9. He walked in. The Gold Coast penthouse was still quiet elegance, tastefully warm, nothing flashy. It smelled like citrus and fresh linen. BJ came bounding down the hallway moments later. Daddy. Miles knelt, catching him midair. I missed you, buddy. You always say that, and it's always true. BJ took the bag and bolted to the table. Miles followed him, sitting across as the boy tore into the pastels like a little professional. Chandra watched from the kitchen, silent. After a while, Miles looked up. You always make coffee in silence? She poured herself a cup. When there's nothing worth saying. He didn't push. Not yet. BJ was coloring a picture of a giraffe. Miles let him focus before clearing his throat. Chandra, he said carefully, you were right. She sipped her coffee. I failed as a partner. I disrespected you, ignored you. I let my pride turn into cruelty, and You enjoyed the power, she cut in. Don't romanticize it. He didn't argue. I thought being with you would make me feel more, he said. More grounded, more secure. But I let my own fear poison that. Chandra crossed the room, stood near the window. You know what the worst part was? She asked. Miles looked at her. It wasn't the cheating, she continued. It wasn't the lies, it was the smugness. The way you looked at me like I needed you to matter. He closed his eyes. You were my husband, Miles, she said, not my gatekeeper. I know that now. She stared at him. Good. Because I don't need you to be anything more than a father to your son. I will be. No broken promises, no grand gestures, no more performances. He nodded slowly. Just presence. Exactly, she said. Be present, be kind, be reliable. Her voice dropped an octave. But don't try to get back what you lost. His lips parted like he might protest, but he saw her eyes. And shut his mouth. BJ looked up from his drawing and grinned. Look, I made you both tall. They turned. On the page were 3 stick figures, Mommy, Daddy, and BJ, under a rainbow. Chandra smiled. That's beautiful. Miles swallowed hard. Yeah, it is. They stood in the same room, but the lines between them had changed. Forever. The first headline appeared on a Monday morning. It started as a whisper on finance blogs. Then it roared across national outlets. Bordeaux Equity CEO was married to Schaefer heir, and he never knew. Social feeds caught fire. Twitter turned into a courtroom. Instagram reposted her wedding photos with fresh eyes. TikTok commentators wore silk robes and mimicked her courtroom line. "You think I want your money, Miles? Baby, I was the money before you learned how to lace a tie." She never said a word, not to reporters camped outside her office, not to the morning shows that begged for interviews, not even to friends texting emojis and stunned reactions. Silence was her luxury, but her silence was loud. For years, Chandra Bordeaux had moved through boardrooms as an advisor, a private equity name, or a ghost investor. Now the world realized she wasn't behind the curtain. She was the curtain, and she'd been married to a man who laughed at her in divorce court. It wasn't just the money. It was the audacity, the sexism, the racial arrogance, the entire spectacle of a man who thought he was trading down when he was barely part of the trade. By Wednesday, Forbes dropped the bomb. Her face on the cover, minimal makeup, braided crown, no jewelry, eyes straight into the lens. The billionaire nobody saw coming. Inside, the story was clinical and precise. No gossip, no bitterness, just facts. She had turned 3 collapsing fintechs into gold. She held 72% of West Point Shipping, making her the 3rd largest private owner of maritime freight in the U.S. She was the majority shareholder in a tech firm about to go public, and she owned Bordeaux Equity outright with no board, 0 debt, 0 scandals, 0 outside investors. The piece ended with a simple note from the author. She declined to comment. "We believe that says more than enough." Victoria Schaefer choked on her coffee when she saw it. Miles's assistant said his office door stayed shut for 6 hours. Chandra stayed at her penthouse with BJ, painting with him on the balcony. Her phone buzzed with congratulatory messages from CEOs who used to treat her like a junior partner. She didn't reply. She didn't gloat. She parented. She moved on. But the world now knew. The woman Miles tried to reduce was 10 steps ahead, and everyone had finally caught up. Forbes didn't chase shock value. The story wasn't loud. It didn't mock Miles. It didn't dramatize the courtroom. Instead, it framed Chandra as a master strategist, a woman who walked beside wealth, not beneath it. The cover hit every airport, newsstand, and investor's inbox within 24 hours. But what truly disrupted the narrative was how Chandra had done it all quietly. In a world of noise, she had moved in silence. No PR team, no personal Instagram, no press junkets, just power. That silence was the strategy. Her anonymity had been a shield, and now that shield became her weapon. The article detailed how, in a 10-year span, Chandra made strategic acquisitions under shell firms. She picked up undervalued assets and transformed them. She rescued failing logistics, businesses. She had fingers in freight, fintech, and AI-driven healthcare platforms without ever appearing in shareholder briefings. She played chess in a world full of men playing poker. The article quoted one anonymous CEO. It wasn't until the Schaefer name appeared in court records that anyone connected the dots. That Chandra Bordeaux, that ex-wife. And once they did, panic spread across the Schaefer boardroom. Because if she held that kind of wealth and power, what else had she touched? Banks reevaluated their partnerships with Schaefer Industries. Brokers revisited contracts. Investors called in meetings. The board grew restless. Victoria called an emergency session. We need to control the narrative. But it was too late. Chandra hadn't written a word, and yet she was the author of everything falling apart. Some board members demanded an audit. Others feared exposure. Leaks started pouring out. Overspending, nepotism, mismanaged contracts. Miles tried to push back. But with every step, he stumbled over the simple fact. The woman he had dismissed was now a headline. One meeting turned heated when an investor said plainly, "Why didn't you tell us your wife was the billionaire?" Miles snapped, "She wasn't when I married her." The room went silent. One director muttered, "She was. You just didn't see her." Chandra never commented. She didn't need to. Her presence in that Forbes issue said everything. She never needed validation. She had control. And while the world buzzed, she went back to work, quiet, measured, unstoppable. At Bordeaux Equity, she signed a new deal with a global shipping partner. At home, she read Goodnight Moon to BJ and tucked him in with a kiss. The media played catch-up. Miles played defense. Chandra? She played the long game and won. The first real damage wasn't public. It was corporate. Sheffer Industries started losing deals. Contracts evaporated. Loan approvals slowed. Partners grew hesitant. Venture capital quietly pulled out of pending projects. And in the boardroom, there were whispers, tight, suspicious ones. The collapse wasn't sudden. That wasn't Chandra's style. She dismantled slowly, like silk unraveling from a suit thread by thread until the whole thing fell apart, and no one could point to when it began. 1 month after the divorce, a small logistics firm in Milwaukee, acquired by Chandra 5 years ago, pulled out of a joint venture with Schaefer's West Coast branch. No statement, just a signed termination letter. Weeks later, a promising fintech app that had been in talks to merge with Miles's digital banking unit backed out. Rumor had it their investor changed his mind. That investor? Owned by a holding company quietly backed by Bordeaux Equity. Miles paced the floor of his office as one manager after another brought him bad news. "She's bleeding us dry," his CFO whispered. "And we can't touch her. She's everywhere and nowhere." Victoria refused to believe it at first. She wouldn't do that to the father of her child, she said. That girl's playing games, but it wasn't a game. It was consequence. And Chandra didn't have to lift a finger in public. She used companies she had long since acquired, boards where she held minority, but controlling shares and people loyal not to her name, but her values. Every piece moved in silence. She didn't drag Miles in interviews. She didn't write a blog post. She didn't tweet. She just acted. Bordeaux Equity acquired a 12% share in a private transportation line that Sheffer Industries had once tried to buy. The company signed with Bordeaux. Sheffer was cut out. One of Miles's tech executives defected. He joined a startup funded by one of Chandra's shell firms. Bit by bit, the empire Miles believed was impenetrable began to crack. Not from a hostile takeover, not from scandal, but from being ignored. Chandra didn't wage war. She didn't need to. She moved on. And that was worse. Because while Miles was scrambling to stop the bleeding, she was already ahead, launching new projects, raising her son, and making sure the man who laughed at her in court now had to watch everything he built, piece by piece, become hers. But she never gloated, never bragged, never said a word, because for women like Chandra, silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy, and power spoke loudest when you didn't even have to raise your voice. It started with whispers, then a scheduled vote, then silence. Victoria Sheffer had ruled the boardroom of Sheffer Industries like a queen mother for nearly 2 decades. Her name carried weight. Her eyes silenced interns. Her connections opened doors for Miles, even when his decisions teetered on reckless. But the tide shifted, and Chandra didn't need to lift a finger, because power, once disrespected, finds its own way to rebalance. At a quarterly board meeting in early spring, the chairman cleared his throat and tapped his pen once against the polished mahogany table. "There's been concern," he said carefully, regarding the company's stability post-divorce, and the public's perception of board decisions under recent leadership. Victoria stiffened in her chair. She was dressed in her signature pearl gray suit, with her hair tightly pinned back and her mouth set in a perfect line. "I've steered this company for years," she said, calm but defensive. "And I don't answer to whispers." "You do," said another board member, "when they come from shareholders. Especially the new ones." That was the moment Victoria knew. They had done it. Chandra hadn't shown her face, but her influence had slipped through the cracks, quietly convincing minor stakeholders, acquiring dormant shares and placing loyal proxies in positions that now held voting power. Votes that mattered. The resolution was clear. Remove Victoria Sheffer from the board of directors, effective immediately. Reason: conflict of interest, damage to brand reputation, and instability in executive decision-making. "I built this company with my husband," Victoria snapped. "You maintained it," the chairman corrected, "but it's evolving, and your son's personal missteps have cost us heavily." Victoria stood. She didn't plead. That wasn't her way, but her eyes flickered to Miles, silent, seated 2 chairs down. He didn't look at her. He couldn't, because part of him knew this was fair. Chandra had played no tricks. She hadn't gone on air or written op-eds. She hadn't slandered or smeared. She'd let the numbers speak, and the numbers didn't lie. Sheffer Industries was bleeding, Investors were pulling out, and the only common denominator? The woman they underestimated. As Victoria gathered her purse and straightened her shoulders, the room remained silent. Not out of respect, but recognition. The board didn't belong to the Schaefers anymore. It belonged to whoever earned it. And that woman wasn't in the room. She was probably having lunch with her son BJ at their favorite cafe in the Gold Coast, unaware, or uninterested, that the woman who once called her too ambitious had just been quietly shown the door. Because some wins don't need applause, some just need patience. The envelope arrived on a Monday. No courier, no name. Just a plain cream-colored envelope placed at the center of Miles's desk inside his office at Schaefer Industries. He noticed it the moment he walked in. There were no initials, no corporate seal, no perfume, just quiet weight. Miles stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. Something in his chest tightened. He was used to receiving files, notices, executive briefs, but this felt personal. He opened it. Inside was a single card, no signature, no logo, just 7 words in a clean, sharp font. Now you work for the woman you underestimated. Be good to our son. C. Miles dropped into his chair. He read the card again. And again. And again. The words didn't stab. They stripped him bare of pride, illusion, ego. He leaned back and ran a hand through his hair. He was the CEO in title, but now he understood what that title meant when someone else owned the walls around him. He checked the board acquisition documents again, this time with real attention. Several key positions had changed. Some names were unfamiliar, but the entities behind them led back to one place: Bordeaux Equity. Through layers of shell companies and quiet purchases, Chandra had acquired controlling interest. She never asked for power. She took it, silently. While he was too busy mocking her in court, too focused on playing the dominant husband, she was structuring her control. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't gloated. She had just moved. Now, every major decision would pass through people loyal to her. He was still CEO, on paper, but every email, every call, every project needed sign-off from someone whose hands led back to her. His ex-wife, the woman he laughed at when she walked away. He let out a bitter breath and stared out his office window. The skyline looked smaller now, not less impressive, just less his. There was no rage, not even shame, only clarity. He had tried to own a woman who was never for sale, and now the empire he thought would secure his legacy stood on legs she strengthened. He reached for the card again, traced the words with his finger. Not a threat, not a plea, just truth. A reminder. He had underestimated her, yes, but worse, he had disrespected her. Now, the only connection they shared was a son. And for the first time, Miles realized something he hadn't understood. During all the arguments, all the silences, all the court proceedings, Chandra never fought him. She had simply outgrown him. There was no scandal, no press conference, no social media post, just the slow, quiet collapse of a man who once laughed at the woman he married, thinking she was beneath him. Chandra never said a word to the media. She didn't need to. She didn't gloat. She didn't call him out publicly. She let the silence speak. And in that silence, the world began to listen. It started with whispers in Chicago's financial circles. Then, the Forbes cover. The billionaire you overlooked. A black and white photo of Chandra Bordeaux, standing tall in front of a glass tower, minimal makeup, natural hair, eyes calm but unreadable. Power didn't need to scream. It just stood and watched you run out of excuses. Inside the magazine, financial analysts broke down her moves. The quiet acquisition of West Point Shipping, the calculated investment in 4 unicorn startups, her discreet partnerships with global trade networks, and, of course, the strategic takeover of Schaefer Industries. Every dotted line led back to her. Miles wasn't just outmaneuvered. He was irrelevant now. Victoria Schaefer had already been forced off the board by shareholders demanding accountability after the company's financial dip. Once the darling of Chicago's old money elite, Victoria had become a cautionary tale, a mother who thought her name was enough. She now hosted private brunches in smaller circles, where her wine glass shook slightly as she spoke of betrayals. But everyone knew the truth. There had been no betrayal, only exposure. Chandra Bordeaux had walked into their world, played by their rules for a short time, then rewrote the game entirely. She didn't seek revenge. She built something better, not for ego, for legacy. Every move was for BJ, for herself, for the younger version of her who once thought she had to downplay her brilliance to be loved. The final card she sent to Miles. No logo, no signature, no power play, just truth. 7 words that told him everything he needed to know. Now you work for the woman you underestimated. Be good to our son. See, it wasn't a victory lap. It was closure. She hadn't wanted to destroy him. She wanted him to see her. And now, he did. Not as the woman he married, not as the woman he mocked, but as the woman who walked away with grace and came back holding the keys to the empire he thought he controlled. The penthouse was quiet. Chandra stood barefoot in front of the floor-to-ceiling window of her gold coast high-rise, the early evening sun painting gold across the skyline. Her silk robe tied loosely around her waist, a soft weight in her arms. BJ, her son, her reason, rested on her hip, eyes wide as he pointed to the buildings glowing in the distance. "Mommy, is that where Daddy works?" She didn't flinch. She kissed the top of his curly hair and smiled. "Not anymore, baby." He giggled, not understanding, but sensing peace. That was enough for her. Behind them, the apartment buzzed softly with life. A pot simmered on the stove. A jazz playlist played low. The walls, lined with art she had collected over the years, felt lived in, warm. There was no emptiness here, no hunger for validation, only presence. BJ squirmed slightly in her arms. She set him down gently, and he ran toward the living room, where a set of wooden blocks waited. He was building a tower, bigger each day, focused, sharp, like her. She watched him for a moment, then turned back to the view. Chicago pulsed below her, loud, driven, complicated. But from up here, it was calm. A city she had conquered without ever needing to announce herself. She didn't need his name. She had her own. She didn't need revenge. She had power without cruelty. She didn't need to beg for love. She had given it freely until it wasn't honored. Now, she moved on her terms, with her son, with her legacy, with a clarity that Miles Schaefer could never buy. Even if he liquidated everything he had left, he would wake each morning knowing the truth. He had laughed while signing the divorce papers. He had smirked while offering scraps. He had mocked the woman who had already owned the floor beneath his feet. And now, she didn't hate him. She simply didn't need him. Her wealth didn't define her. Her name didn't save her. Her strength did. Her peace did. Her self-worth did. BJ called from the living room. "Mommy, I made a big one. Come see." She turned, smiling. "I'm coming, baby." As she walked away from the window, her phone buzzed with another headline. Notification. Some article about top 50 business minds in America. She didn't even check it. She already knew. She bent down, kissed her son's forehead, and whispered, "This is our empire now." If this story moved you, type "She was always the empire" in the comments. Thank you for watching today's story on Mr. Peterson Long Stories. We don't just tell stories, we tell your truth. We tell stories for every woman who stayed quiet when she should have screamed, for every mother who rebuilt from scratch, for every person who was underestimated, dismissed, or told to be grateful for crumbs. Chandra's journey wasn't just about divorce or money. It was about clarity, about realizing that no amount of status, last names, or legacy can measure your value. Because worth doesn't ask for permission. It shows up. So let today's story remind you of one thing. Never let someone else define your value. Not a partner, not a family, not a salary, not a name. They don't make you. You do. Respect can be requested, but self-worth, that's owned. It's quiet. It's firm. It doesn't need applause, but it never apologizes for showing up. If you've ever walked away from someone who thought you needed them, drop where you're watching from in the comments. If you've ever chosen peace over begging for love, tell us about it. If this story moved you and made you feel seen, then type this in the comments. I was always the prize. Let the world know you never begged for a seat at the table. You were the table. Subscribe so you don't miss our next story. Like the video if you believe women deserve to be heard. Share this with someone who needs to remember who they are. We'll be back with more, right here, only on Mr. Peterson Long Stories.